Anthony. Anthony. Margie. I'd like to welcome everybody to the special joint meeting of the County of San Benito Board of Supervisors and the San Benito County Planning Commission. If you'll rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Ready? Salute.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Did you know we have a San Benito County flag?
Yeah.
Cool.
If I can have a motion for the certificate of posting.
So moved?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Assuming that's a 10-0 vote, or is it? Okay. All right, then we will move on to our workshop. Byron?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks to everyone and everyone in the public for taking time out of their schedule to work on this very important document for the county. The version of the general plan update that you have reflects previous Board of Supervisors policy direction, which reflects greater flexibility in certain policies with minor technical and some grammatical revisions. And it's in a red line, a track changes format. Also included in original in another copy is some narrative, or I'm sorry, also included are the narratives and the existing conditions of the existing conditions and benefits of the new community study area. So the new community study area language that was asked for is in there as well. The sections that you have with proposed revisions have been included are the land use element, the economic development element, the circulation, public facilities, natural resources, safety, and the glossary. There was some confusion earlier. Previously, what was posted online included comments and comments to the comments and comments on those comments. When we realized that was difficult to read, it has been replaced with just simply the red line track changes version. So I wanted to make sure that everyone understood what was online and what, the Planning Commission has with their hard copies comments. What's online now is the red line changes. So with that, I will go ahead and turn it over to Michael Groves and Ashley Hefner from EMC to go over how we're going to proceed this evening and what you're going to look at tonight, and we'll get to work.
Thank you, Byron. Michael Groves, President of EMC Planning Group, and Ashley Hefner is with me to share the presentation tonight. I really want to thank you, the board, and the planning commissioners for joining together to do this. It makes it so much more efficient to work together and set policy together as we move forward on this. You've had some stumbling blocks in the past on this document, and we're here to try to help you move this thing forward and get to a finalized general plan with an EIR that's adequate to support that general plan. So I wanted to thank you for that. What is a general plan? You don't want to hear that dissertation again, I'm sure, but I just want to remind you a general plan is general. You will have applications, development applications come before you, you'll have specific plans come before you, and their purpose is to take what is at 40,000 feet in the general plan, adhere to those policies, and provide something more specific to you as you see those plans come forward or those development applications come forward. So again, just reminding you that it's a general document, also reminding you it's a policy document. So you're setting your policy for the County of San Benito on how you'd like to see development occur, how you'd like to protect natural resources, how you'd like to have safety happen in the community, and all those types of things. The other things I wanted to say about it is the board gave us a direction from, not only us, but gave the last consultant a direction as well as gave us direction to provide narratives on the new community study areas, to provide more flexibility in the policies, to encourage economic development as a part of the general plan. So we're bringing forward changes that you will see tonight that hopefully provide you that direction that you've already asked for. We've also tried to, per the last Board of Supervisors meeting, clarify some of the mapping and some of that. We won't go over that tonight because that's pretty detailed and it's going to take us more time to get it the way you'd like to see it. But we do want to get that in front of the Board of Supervisors at some point in the next month to make sure that you're in agreement with that before we move forward with an environmental document. So those are those basic things. Our work level, just so you know, is, and Ashley's done 99% of this. It's all credit to her. But she's gone through all of the minutes and summaries of the minutes from the board, all the way through the entire process. She's gone through the February 2013 draft general plan and all the comments on that general plan, as well as the 2013 draft environmental impact report and all the comments on that EIR. So she's tried to go through all of those piece by piece so that hopefully we don't miss anything this time around going through, and make sure that we hit all of those mapping things that we need to do, all of the direction of the board that has happened previously. So I just wanted to encourage you to know that Ashley's really done a lot of homework to make sure that we're hitting all of the, crossing all the T's and dotting all the I's. And then there's a lot of material tonight, is what I want to say. And I know you know there's a lot of material in front of you. So we're going to try to break it up into pieces so that we can look at a piece at a time, have you get maybe some public input on those pieces, have feedback to the Planning Commission and Board from the public, have the Planning Commission and Board give us feedback and give staff feedback. And then at some point, I'd like the board to set a hearing going forward when we look at those maps and that type of thing, and basically say, everything we've done so far we're in agreement with. You're not doing an approval, but you're doing an acknowledgement and a direction to staff to go forward with the environmental document because you're in agreement with everything we've done so far. So that's where we want to get to. That's kind of the goal of this whole thing. With regard to the goals for tonight, again, we're not going to review the list of we're not going to review the mapping changes on the actual land use map, but we are going to talk to you about some of the questions that you had at the last meeting and the meetings before that about, what about Tres Pinos? What about granite? What about some of these things that were, asked about, that were part of the process but weren't on the map, and what happened there? And Ashley has gone back and done a lot of research, and she'll give you some answers on those. We're going to go through each one of the elements, as I said, and try to take them an element at a time. And then we're going to ask the Board and Planning Commission to move forward with some kind of an action in terms of acceptance or direction. And that could happen tonight, or it might happen in a future Board of Supervisors meeting. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ashley and ask her to begin the process. And the first segment is going to be those questions that you had about all of the various landowner requests and things that had come at you. We're trying to clean those all up at one time. That'll be the first piece. Then we'll start on the land use element, and then we'll just go element by element, just so you know that's what we're doing. And the board chair can choose how he wants to take public input, when he wants to take public input as we go along. There'll probably be some obvious places to do that. So we'll just kind of go as we go and see how that works out. All right. With that, I'd like to introduce Ashley again and have her start with the PowerPoint. And as you're going through this, just remember, she'll also, once we get past the landowner request, once we start on the land use element, she'll actually put the element up on the screen. So you'll have it in front of you, red line, as well as on the screen, so you can work back and forth. If you have questions about something, let's go to page whatever, and let's talk about that particular item. Okay, thank you.
Good evening. Thank you again, everyone, for being here. Is there anyone in the audience that doesn't currently have a hard copy handout of the red lines that would like one? If so, they're up here on the table. And I can... Okay, so to begin with the some of the questions that have come up on the land use diagram, I will just go through them point by point, and if you have a question, just give a holler. So the first area that we looked into was whether the Tres Pinos residential designation was included and approved by the board, and we did confirm that at the April 2011 meeting, the board did approve an alternative that included making this first bubble, which you can barely see, but it's the bubble closer to the southern side of the city of Hollister city limits as residential mixed, and then the smaller bubble below that that extends down to Tres Pinos as residential rural. So those were included in the approved alternative, and so with that, we would...
Mr. Chair?
Are there any more of these?
Yeah,
The commissioners didn't get them.
yeah, right.
There might be a couple more on the back counter. Thanks.
Next page. Ray? I heard about it.
I can share them.
Thank you.
So I've just pulled up here the detail of the map that was approved with that alternative in April 2011. The next item to verify was whether the additional industrial heavy designation in Aromas associated with the Granite Rock property was approved as well. And that definitely was included in the board minutes from that same hearing. It just wasn't carried over into that alternative the same way that the Tres Pinos blurbs were. So we did verify that that is included. We're planning on going in and looking at the parcel level to determine exactly what we would recommend being included in that designation based on existing land use in that area. An additional correction was to clarify exactly where the new community study area and wine hospitality overlay lines fall. That we are starting in on that process. That's going to be a little bit more time intensive just because it'll require looking where existing land uses and parcel lines fall and identifying areas along the line where it currently is, what parcel should and should not be incorporated based on all of those factors. Next was the definition of the dots or circles associated with the commercial nodes along roadways, and we're also looking into what the best way to define those are. We were looking in whether they can be defined on a parcel basis, but in the first preliminary research efforts, it's seeming like that approach may not be the best, because in some instances you may have a parcel that is immediately adjacent to an intersection, or you may have one that extends, an agricultural parcel that extends very far outside of what we believe the intention of those nodes to be is. So we're doing research into what that approach, our recommendation for that approach will be. We will be providing zoom-ins or thumbnails of communities, the census-designated communities for Aromas, Ridgemark, and Tres Pinos. So that'll be a separate figure, and it'll be the same information on the larger land use diagram. It'll just be at a smaller scale so that for landowners and people researching those communities, you'll be able to more clearly identify what the designations are for each parcel. We also received public comment that there was a property north of North Street, just outside of the city of Hollister city limits, that had received approval for a general plan amendment in 2006, redesignating that land from agricultural to residential mixed. So we did verify that that approval did occur, and we'll be updating the land use diagram accordingly. We would propose adding, just like the Santana Ranch specific plan designation, a Fairview Corners designation, since it has been approved. We also will be adding a wine trail map to the economic development element that provides more detail than there's an existing figure that does show some of the trail map, but this will be a larger, more in-depth map. Another piece that we would propose is adding more identifiers to the land use map so that it would be easier for people to see, first of all, an aerial layer so that you can get more of a sense of where you're looking on the map. Also adding additional place names, park names, additional roadways and labels, and also to implement a parcel level designation layer. It currently does have that for the most part, but there are areas where it's lacking. And as I said, we would be adding additional information such as parks, possibly adding additional figures to sections that currently don't have figures, like utilities, where existing sewer lines and water lines are. We already have the majority of those figures in the EIR and other background documents, so it would just be pulling over those existing figures for reference. And in the preliminary review of all of these changes, we did identify that a bulk of the existing landowner requests actually will be changed just based on all of these already approved changes. So there are only a couple outlying landowner requests that would not be addressed, but it really does take care of the bulk of them. That's what we have proposed so far. Are there any questions on these revisions to the mapping?
Any questions from any of the board or the commissioners?
Just the timing, Mr. Chair, of how soon these will be presented to us, or will they be just part as we move forward?
We're hoping to have them available at the next hearing that is scheduled. So we've already got our GIS guru working on these changes, so we're going to do everything we can to have them at the next hearing, whatever date that gets decided upon.
Okay, want to continue?
Okay. So just a couple of points of reference for the board, commissioners, and the public. This is just for your reference for the most part. It just shows the past policy direction and the policy direction at the last hearing, identifying the mapping changes, and allowing us to do that with funds from the buffer. So how we anticipate that this will work tonight is as Michael said, I'll put the Word versions of the strikeout and underline up on the overhead. If there are any questions or clarification needed, as well as any revisions that the board would like to make, we can do that in real time together in the Word document. And after all of the changes that everybody would like to see are made, we'll ask that approval is made element by element, incorporating all of the revisions that are included. And we anticipate that once the revisions are approved for each element, that no other changes will be made until the responses to the EIR are evaluated, and then additional revisions can be incorporated. This chronology of the new community study areas is also, just for your reference, it's just a map of how we got to where we are with the new community study areas, and also includes that the narratives for each study area were requested back in 2013. So with that, we can jump into the land use element. I would like to point out that a couple of additional changes were identified after the packets were posted. And everyone should have an errata, and there were a couple of copies on the front desk if anyone in the public needs one. And I can pull that up on the overhead. So the first is in the land use element on page 21 of the packet. It's also page 320 of the land use element. The areas that were affected have been highlighted in gray so that they're easier to identify. In this case, it was a sentence that was a carryover from language that had been removed, and it didn't apply to anything in the section any longer. So it was kind of a hanging leftover sentence that just missed being removed. The same goes for the next correction, which was on page 25. The next revision was on page 29, and it was in reference to the figure that you see on the overhead. And it had mentioned that the county shall encourage new communities to be planned and designed to achieve a green community standard. And there was some public confusion as to what that meant. So we correlated it to the policy in that section that dealt with sustainable strategies.
Mr. Chair, I have a question. Ashley, will you bring these up as we go page by page? Will you bring these up again so that we, because like the one that has the photo, you didn't complete it, so I want to know exactly what the wording is going to be under that, what the caption will be. So will we be, or unless it's on the next page? No, it isn't.
Well, that, you mean on the first page of the errata, it's not finished?
Down at the bottom where it's got the photograph,
Yeah.
it just ends with an incomplete sentence, and I'd like to know what you plan. I have an idea, because that was one of the ones that I thought was not particularly what we wanted to see or what I wanted to see, and I was
Okay.
going to recommend that we change that, so.
Sure. Now, so that brings up a good question. I've heard a couple of different ways in which board members would like to go about reviewing each element. So maybe before we start on the actual element, it would be good for us to come to a consensus on whether we want to go page by page, whether we just want to identify questions or concerns about specific sections, just so that we know how to tackle it as a group.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
why don't we just go page by page and you ask the commission, okay, anybody has an issue, questions, address it now, and then go through the entire thing and then make a motion or make a recommendation or make whatever, temporary do pass in budget terms to move on to the next section, because I'm lost what you're saying right now.
Okay. Anyone?
I agree, Mr. Chair. Page by page would be easier for me.
Okay, we've got quite a few pages here.
I know.
Okay, all right.
Okay, so then I'll hold off on going into this anymore, and we'll just do it when we get to that page. If that sounds okay. All right.
Let's bring the coffee.
Sure.
this week, is it ready?
All right, so
For me, there's about,
just so that everyone can see where the revisions begin, start with the first page, and we then go into the land use designations. There are no changes to the land use designations until we get to the table. Now, I have gone ahead and slightly changed some of the key colors on the table because when we started going through the land use diagram map, we noticed that it was very hard to tell what certain colors were versus others. So you'll see that we've tried to identify colors that are a lot more impactful and that don't have the same kind of tones. As well, it doesn't reflect and track changes, but a couple of the designations in the table we just relocated so that all of the residential designations were on the same page and that all of the commercial and industrial designations are on the same page. So you'll see here's the first revision, which, as I had mentioned before, includes a Fairview Corner specific plan designation, and then some changes to the notes in relation to including that as a designation instead of just a general planned development area.
Mr. Chair, and I apologize, maybe, I'm the one, maybe I'm the bad one here today. But can we go, Mr. Chair, can we just do, 3-1, any questions, input, and then go to the next page? 3-2, any questions, input, and then go to the next one, 3.3. I'm just used to doing that in the past, and I feel more comfortable that way, and I can take notes and then take them home tonight, then study them. I don't know.
That sounds good to me. Makes my life a whole lot easier.
We second the motion.
All right. So are we done with 3.1?
Yes, does anybody have any questions?
No.
3.2. Actually, this is 3.8.
Oh, they didn't put,
Any questions?
3.8 or 3-8?
3-8, excuse me.
Okay, I have one, I believe it's on 3-8, let me look.
so we're okay with 3.4, 3.5,
On the first paragraph, Mr. Chair, if I could, on that one, on the right-hand side, the sentence that, it says that will be able to sustainable accommodate, it doesn't make any sense to me. I think it needs to be rewritten. If you could look at that. It's on the right-hand side, the first paragraph on the top.
And where does it begin?
It begins with the focus of this goal section. You see that?
Yes.
Okay, keep going, and then it says, right after San Benito, that county, that will be able to sustainable accommodate the county's, I don't really know what you're trying to say there, but that needs to be reworded. Read it
Okay.
and see if you understand what you're trying to say there, and maybe you can explain it to me.
That's left over from the last general plan document, so we'll just have to catch that.
Yep.
So we probably need to make the change now so that we don't have to bring it back.
Okay?
3.2, mine was empty, was yours?
Sustainably. So the focus of this section,
Lost here a little bit. So there's 3 on the laptops. It's 3
We're looking at-
LU-3.8, and then there's
We're doing the
page
pages.
numbers.
The pages is 3-8.
3-3, I'm looking at 3-8.
Go down to the bottom left-hand side, and that's where the page is.
You're right.
See the page?
Oh, 3-8, okay.
Okay.
The different.
So, Mr. Chair, so the problem we have is we have different page numbers in the Planning Commission.
5,
So our 3-8 is different than what the Planning Commission has.
because there were some slight revisions.
Yeah, they're different.
Because there was the hard copy that was
they had-
distributed to the Planning Commission that had the comments, and then no hard copy was distributed to the board. The board gets it digitally, and then we switched, because it was hard to read, we switched the digital ones out online with clean copies. So it looks like the page numbers were inadvertently changed.
Those were the one, yes, correct. And this
Those are
should,
the right ones, right?
and this should only be a problem for text that's not included in a policy or a program. So we can use policy and program numbers, I think, for the majority of what we'll be looking at. And I'll also put it up on the projector so that it'll be easier to find.
Well, I don't, Mr. Chair, the thing is, I'm looking to my left and looking to our right, both Planning Commissioner Lowe and Rodriguez, and their 3.8 is totally different from mine 3.8, so I really want to
We've established that.
be consistent, so I think they should also get the same packages that we're also reading.
So we can use policy numbers, program numbers, we can use headings if there's any confusion. But for the most part, I think we should be able to identify where things are, and we'll also have it on the projector.
I have what
Yeah, let's take a 15-minute break and make copies.
These handouts are the same as the
Yeah.
laptops.
Yes.
Correct.
Okay, this is the same as the laptop.
So what I think what needs to happen is the Planning Commission needs a copy of what was online.
Just make copies.
Yep.
Do you have your laptop?
That's,
No. So I'm going
That-
some copies of this track.
All right. We'll take a 10-minute break.
yes. Actually, we don't, it just shouldn't have a footnote because it's in that language. That works too. Yep.
And then the footnote 3 talks about San Juan Oaks instead of development, which is what it's,
So what we say instead is that we will,
Right, but it's also talking about the San Juan Oaks developed area, because that's the only planned development area on the whole diagram.
oh, okay. Then why don't you say San Juan Oaks?
It's not approved yet. It's just called out as planned development. So it can only have a designation once it's approved.
Okay. Well, then maybe have an introductory sentence that planned development areas such as the San Juan Oaks.
Sure.
Something like that.
Yeah.
To
Yeah.
take it general and then make it specific. That was all I had.
Thank you. Just a general plans development addition.
change.
They were all right here and we passed them out. See, every
Yep.
board member's got one.
Oh,
Volunteers.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we passed them out and then Byron brought some stuff.
And there aren't any changes between the copies.
this is already approved.
No, I mean,
Yeah.
I think what we're gonna do is I'm gonna stand up here with Ashley and she's gonna try to make changes, but we're not, I don't really wanna make changes. If somebody has a typo, just tell me, I'll write it down. Okay? Tell me where it is, we'll write it down, we'll go and fix it.
Yeah.
What we wanna do is, I don't want us to,
I've got
Ashley
some,
can make whatever
so
changes she
it's
wants.
okay that you didn't bring
And
them.
then you'll bring them back to the next. Because we don't need,
Yeah.
we don't need to figure out what sentence
No,
X, Y, Z
no.
is supposed to say tonight.
Yeah.
You just need to point it out.
Just point it out.
Yeah.
Okay.
We don't have to do it live. We talked about doing this as one option. If it got really sticky, if somebody wanted to, but we don't have to. Remember you and I talked on the phone. Let's take this meeting and set another board of supervisors meeting for after planning commission and have you make a final decision.
I don't even think this, I mean,
Based on Pennsylvania.
Gotta give it our best shot.
personally, but, well, I got many I won't, I guess, over
Racial.
group sitting up there.
Because
But we
prime
get
is
something
one.
right.
That's on it.
Yeah.
Prime is one, two, three. But rangeland.
We don't treat it
That's right, I missed it. That was better, man. That was like,
as sport at this point in time. But it doesn't do anything to encourage growth to be centered or focused towards the city. And that's the weakness I see with our general plan is that none of it really focuses growth and development towards the city.
But it does say that on the general plan. It does
Yeah.
say that we will encourage
But
the.
we also encourage new communities to be planned and designed to achieve.
Oh, that's wrong. That's the one that's crossed off. They've got it all.
Oh,
Be different. When we get to that page, we're gonna change
okay.
that wording.
Yeah, but just by having the designated areas gives the impression that we're encouraging growth to be focused towards those areas.
What's your take on the new cities? Not new cities, but new.
My opinion
Communities.
is people are going to look at something and see what they can do with it and then try to make it fit in the rules or change the rules as we go. It's like Santana Ranch. They have this vision for it and will it work? We don't know. I mean,
Now there you have area. They didn't call it new communities those days. They called it something else. But that was the same thing. It was designated as an area of special study.
An area of special
Special
study,
study.
and that gave them a leg up that it was already designated within the general plan, and that was more apt. And that's where we see Santana Ranch and Fairview Corners
Was
being
Fairview
established.
Ranch Fairview area special study
Yeah.
back in the days?
Yeah,
In the old
that was
general
part
plan.
of the area of special study. It went from Airline Highway through that entire corridor to Sunnyside. That's general plan. Yeah, it was there for a long time.
somebody turned the air conditioner off.
Yeah.
It's fine with me, but I know some people don't like it so colder.
And I know we voted on this time and time again, but I say, just go ahead and eliminate any, like, what's the deal with the guy across the street? Why can't he submit an application and be designated for development?
It's not fair.
See what you're saying?
If we can reconvene, they'll have these printed copies that we need in just a minute. But maybe we can do if there's any questions from the public on the land use revisions. Do we have anyone that wants to speak on the first issue that we covered? Okay?
Which one? Oh, this one?
I'm going to do it a little bit at a time. Otherwise they forget.
So I just wanted to be clear for the board and for the public that we had gone over this slide about the land use revisions, and you can see there are some proposals that were brought before Byron as a landowner request. Which ones of those have been accommodated by the board direction that's already occurred, and which ones have not? And there's only two names at the bottom of that slide. Those two names are the only ones that weren't accommodated. All the rest were. So I just want to be clear for the public and for the board on that issue.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Supervisor Patel.
You know, I think we talked about this before and why, or we decided not to take any more landowner requests. But really, what is the difference? Because it does point out that it's not a general plan designation for density, these special communities, and really doesn't provide any entitlements whatsoever, what I understand. It's just a designation on a map, and then you still need to go through a general plan amendment and the whole process anyway.
Correct. And these owner requests that we're speaking about are not associated with the study areas. It's due to the other designations that the board had already approved, like the Tres Pinos, the rural mixed south of the city of Hollister. It just so happens that whichever landowner requests were in that area will receive that designation because they were incorporated in that certain area. So it's not associated with the study areas.
Yeah.
And the new community, you're correct on the new community study areas. They will require a general plan amendment, specific plan, environmental document, all of the normal process that would take place for that. So yes, they're general designations of study areas within the county. And we've provided, as you see, we'll go through the land use element, we've provided a description for each one of those areas, provided a name for that area, for each of the areas, and a description for those. And we're looking for you to tell us if that's what you were looking for as a part of that direction when you made that direction.
Yeah, and that's what, one of the things that the board knows very well that why I've been always been opposed to these community study areas is because I don't think it's fair for the guy across the street from where that line goes through. And it really doesn't give a whole lot in way of advantage in the process regardless. And so why even have any designation of a community study area to begin with?
So at this point, we followed the board direction on new community study areas, and we followed the board direction on the landowner requests. And I think the good news for the board is that the majority of those landowner requests, what we were all worried about, how much are they going to cost, and this, that, and the other, majority of those were already directed. So we're going to take it, even though we didn't know that going in. That's always the problem with jumping into the middle of a fire, is you don't know what you're going to get. But what we found out is basically a lot of those were already directed by the board, so we feel an obligation to the board and planning commission to include those based under our existing scope. So we will do that. There's some were just mapping errors, some were things that were actually done by resolution and direction by the board and just never got incorporated. So those are being taken care of. So I just wanted to assure the public, the board, and the planning commission that we're stepping up to do that for you, and it'll get completed, and people don't have to have a heavy heartbeat over it, because there's been a lot of conversation about these various requests over time. With that, let's go back to the element. Does everybody have the same copy at this point? Okay, so are the copies not back in yet? Okay. All right. So what?
Use laptops, right?
Yeah, you can use a laptop, or what we're going to do is go by section. So instead of going by page numbers, as was earlier suggested, we'll start by just going section and subsection, and so we'll try to point you to where we are. So let's start with goals. Land use 1, LU 11, and move through. And we're going to take the direction with this that we're basically going to start at that location, and we're just going to continue to move through it unless you have a question, as was directed. Do you have a question as we go through on land use 1.1? Do you have a question on land use 1.2? And basically go through as we had talked about. And the other way we can do this is basically just ask if where do you have questions, and just go to those places and have you give us the direction for those places. We'd like to try to move this fairly quickly through the elements so it doesn't take all night to do 4 pages. That's the concept anyway.
Can we go back to the recommendation or the change that needs to be made on the wording there?
I think what we're going to do is we'll point out any corrections that need to be
Okay.
made, and then they'll make it and come back with it.
Good.
We're
Yeah,
not
unless
gonna-
you have a
we're not
specific
gonna
So
try
that's
to
fine.
language.
I just want to make sure that it's acknowledged.
Yes.
Yeah, we'll take care of that. And if somebody mentioned they had typos, if you have a typo, let us know where it is. You know, it's under land use policy 1.6 or something. I'll just make a note of it. We won't do it live on the screen because it'll take too long. We'll just handle those little things. The live on the screen is only for things that are concerning or things that, are a major change that you want to make and you want to get through with everybody in agreement. All right. And when we get back all the copies, everybody has a copy, then we'll try to go page by page as was discussed. So now we're on 1.2, sustainable development patterns, and through 1.9. Looking at 1.2 through 1.9, if there's any questions. Okay, 110. We're now on sustainable and energy efficient development, follows 110. Land use goal number 2. It's about energy efficiency, sustainable building practices, 2.1, 2.2, 2.3, and on down through 2.7. Any questions? There's not very many changes through here. There's like a word here or there. I mean, there's just very few changes in this section, in this portion of it. Agricultural rangeland. If you see that heading, agricultural rangeland leads to goal land use number 3. And you have 3. Goal land use number 3, and you have 3.1, agricultural diversification, and it leads you through 3.8.
1 second, I want to look at 3.8.
Okay.
Let me see what I have here. Real concerns for us.
3.8 is about the county shall encourage the establishment of a buffer by the residential developer between new urban density residential development and existing conventional agricultural operations. And the reason this is important is sometimes things get confused when they talk about agricultural buffers, and a residential developer will come in and say, well, we want to build these housing and they want a buffer, why don't they put it on the ag land? Well, the point is they need to put it on the residential land if they want to build residential next to ag.
Yeah, and that's, I highlighted that, and it's really needed. I live out in the valley in an agricultural land, and I got neighbors that are city dwellers, have found a country home, and now they're living out in a country, and guess what? People are harvesting at 12 o'clock at night and spraying at 4 o'clock in the morning, and is this strong enough language? I don't think there should be any more, development other than maybe a family farm that wants to have a house for their kid or something. What is the definition of residential development? Are we talking about a subdivision similar to what we have out at Dunville?
CSA 50?
Yeah, and that sort of thing just doesn't work. And
That's the
is that what we're
definition.
talking
We're not
about?
talking about a farmer building a single-family house on his agricultural land or farm worker housing or any of that. We're not talking about those things. We're talking about a residential subdivision being placed next to productive agricultural or conventional agricultural operations.
So, so the 200-foot, the buffer is not designed, it could be 50 feet, 200 feet, or 500 feet.
Yeah, the reason I think it's not appropriate to pick an arbitrary number, and we've seen this in other counties, that typically every situation is different. We had a situation where we established a school next to an agricultural location. That's the property the school district owned. We tried to come up with a no spray zone that was 500 feet from the school. And they couldn't spray, they could only spray at certain times of the day when the kids weren't in school. So we had to come up with an agreement on that. So every situation tends to be different. We've had agricultural buffers that are 50 feet, and we've had agricultural buffers that are 200 feet. So our feeling is that the board should make that call based on, the board and planning commission make that call based on the individual situation.
And I know you changed a lot of the wording to pull it out required to put in encourage, and it's a little softer, even based on the definition at the end, at the glossary that we have at the end of this. But shouldn't that be a requirement? Yes. There should be, it should be required for a buffer in an agricultural area for a residential development, and don't specify the distance, because I agree it could be could vary depending on the intensity of the agriculture of the area.
What if? Okay, so what if we have a cluster subdivision and they can design the cluster subdivision in such a way so that they can work with their neighbor? So I see it like you're seeing it. It's a project per project kind of an orientation where, both parties come in and voice what is reasonable for them. And if you put required, that gives a whole lot more leverage. I think we're an ag county. I think we understand that. I think the supervisors, as well as the planning commissioners, understand that that's priority, and we don't want to shut that down.
So then
I don't think you need required in it. I think encourage is strong enough, because this is just the beginning. Once it gets to the commission level, it can be required.
Mm-hmm.
That's true.
So you're not losing anything.
Yeah, I think the earlier statement I made about this is the 40,000 foot level,
Yeah.
and then it tiers down from there to projects. You can look at it a number of different ways, but it is a policy. It's not just written in the text. It's a policy of the county. So in order for a development to be approved, it has to be consistent with the policy. And so the consistency would be, have you as a county encouraged an agricultural buffer if it was appropriate? If your ag commissioner says, hey, we've got a problem here, this is going to be a conflict, we need to deal with it. That's how we've dealt with it in other counties, is the ag commissioner usually comes out and says, I think we could do 25 feet here and be fine, or we need 500 feet and a no spray zone and a formal agreement in writing about it. It just depends on what the situation is.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, well, if we are an agricultural county, and if the commission's going to require it anyway, why not just use the word require instead of the word encourage? And I know we're mining down to a certain level, but somebody already changed the word require to the word encourage. So why was that change made? And my second question is, why was the word conventional added? Is that to distinguish between organic? And if so, why is there a distinction between organic and conventional?
Can you answer that? I think I don't have a specific answer for the conventional. I think that we had some comments in both the EIR and on the general plan that had suggested changes on some of these from various parties, and it was all over the boards. So I think some of this language came from some of the research we did and some of the comments that were directed. And again, I think we felt strongly that the require is really not necessary as a part of a general plan document. It would be more of a condition of approval or some lower level decision-making process for the board. again, it's, every board's different, every planning commission is different, so that's a call you have to make.
Yeah, I think, from the reason I have a different perspective on it, I view it as being a agriculturalist farming, and the buffer that would be recommended by the person that's doing the development is would be different than the buffer than what I would like to see as being the guy that's making the noise and spraying. And at the end of the day, I know who's to be the nuisance. It's not to be the development, it's to be the guy driving the tractor. But that's something I just wanted to point out, and I do have confidence in the commission that they will set, conditions of approval that would require, that to be addressed.
And board member, the next policy, LU 39, speaks right to that question of the nuisance piece in terms of the right to farm and right to ranch. Now, the only change there was a right to ranch, but we had the right to farm, or the last consultants had the right to farm language already in the general plan. So there's been a few minor changes to that policy that talks about ranching to add that to the perspective, so we're not only talking about row crop agricultural land. So any further questions on 3.8 or 3.9? Okay, 3.10, agricultural land mitigation. 3.11.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
on 310, in the information that the Planning Commission got, it says EIR recommended revision, and that's much better language than what's shown on the 310 that was given to the Board of Supervisors.
Yeah, there has been a lot of discussion back and forth over the EIR language and the recommended language, and so we've looked at both of those, and again, it's a call of the Planning Commission and Board. This is what we're recommending to you, is be the language at the 40,000 foot level in terms of having a one-to-one replacement and having that encouraged as a part of specific plans, development agreements, et cetera, as a part of that planning process. So that's the recommendation we're making in terms of mitigation on projects.
Right, but you've taken out the word required and inserted the word encouraged.
Right,
And
for
I
the
think-
same reason.
I think it's got to be a requirement. If you're going to build on Class 1 soil and take it out of agriculture, there's somewhere else in the county, you've got to take care of the mitigation of that.
I believe it was this board desire to have a more flexible document, and that's why a lot of these requires were changed to encourage. Now, is it the board desire to go through each and every change of require to encourage and decide whether we want it, which way we want it, or do we want a blanket, more flexible document than what we originally had?
We gave the direction, and it is recorded on the board minutes that we have had, that we wanted a more flexible general plan without policy, without ordinance wording on here, which was going to be addressed through our ordinances that we have in place already. So we wanted to give it that 60,000 foot level flexibility. And once we start changing all of that, then we are really going to be out of compliance with our own, with our EIR. So I have to encourage us to make sure that we don't change that back to require, and we keep the encourage on there instead.
And that, I'm sorry.
I would just like to ask a question and for clarification. So project by project, you're going to decide if somebody has to put Class 1 soil, if they're building on Class 1 soil, project by project, you'll decide if they have to mitigate it or not?
I believe that that would be the development agreement that would take place project by project.
So some people will have to mitigate and some people won't.
I believe they will all have to mitigate, but it's not going to be written on our general plan. It has to be flexible enough so that there may be other mitigation solutions.
Yeah, I think one thing I should point out, and this is always a confusing issue, and Pat brings up a good point, And that is, first off, replacement of ag land on a one-to-one basis is not mitigation. It's couched as mitigation, but when you lose ag land, you lose ag land. So it's going to be a significant and unavoidable effect in the EIR no matter what you do. So there's going to have to be some recognition of a significant unavoidable effect in the EIR. You're going to either have to override that, and that's where I just think that's where it opens the window to say this is where we want mitigation or don't want mitigation, even though the mitigation won't take it to a less than significant level. So that's just that conversation, the CEQA conversation that goes on about it. So what we're trying to do is follow the board's direction and say we want to encourage that. We want you to negotiate it as part of your development agreements. For the most part, in a lot of other counties we work at, it works the same way. Everybody knows they have to mitigate. They're already figuring out what land they have to set aside ahead of time, and then they just put it into their development agreements, and it works pretty well. The thing that would work better to add to that conversation is having some kind of a fee that they could pay by ordinance, wouldn't be part of the general plan, but it'd be by ordinance, so that the agricultural land trust could also be chiming in and buying some of this agricultural land and protecting some of the agricultural land. So, and a lot of places haven't gotten far enough to get that fee ordinance in place, and I think that's really a big deal.
We have just the mention of the mitigation fee in here,
Yes, we do. We have it in.
so it's already
Yeah.
addressed at this level anyway.
Yeah. Okay. Any further on 310? Could we move on?
Yes.
311, 312, 13, 14. The next heading is residential development. And those following along by page, it's 3-14 we're now on. You have LU 4.1 through LU 4.7.
One second, give us a second to look at this.
Sure.
I wrote down 4.2. You know, I feel it's, you know, real strongly that water and sewer is probably the biggest constraint that we have in this county. It's not abundant. We only have probably one facility that even remotely runs, handles wastewater adequately, or has a potential of doing so. Shouldn't we be encouraging development to utilize the regional wastewater treatment plant? And we don't make any mention of that in this section.
Supervisor, what we did here was we have in here adequate public services, adequate public facilities and services, and the reason to not mention the specific wastewater treatment plant is it's in one location, and you might have something happen in another part of the county that's not going to be using that treatment plant. It's too far to get to. So I think because you're a county and not a city that you're dealing with, we didn't feel that was appropriate to limit it to one waste treatment plant.
Yeah, and that's what kind of raises the biggest concern I have with this whole particular element, is that we should be encouraging growth and development closer to the city to utilize that type of infrastructure and services, rather than something that's further away and to the degradation of that particular, we're talking about water, right, for instance, that resource. And and maybe a development can do that, but there should be something in here that it should be encouraging it closer to what's already established, just so we have economic scale for the existing population and benefit, rather than something that, I don't know how we monitor that.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
if I can address that. it's a self-limiting. I mean, the fact that you don't have sewer, you don't have water in certain areas in the county, which you don't, it limits itself to development. So it doesn't allow development because you don't have it. The developers that are looking for the kind of densities that you're concerned about, I think, would migrate automatically into the actually sewer's sphere of influence area or the city's sphere of influence, because water would be more acceptable or available, and so it's sewer. And that boundary line's been pushed out a little, so it's a little easier to get them in there if you've seen that map. But it limits itself. If I was going to, let's say I was going to start a project, out in Santa Ana Valley, well, the water out there is going to limit me to the project right there. And then if I'm looking at the kind of densities that the city has, I'm going to have to build my own plant. Now it becomes non-cost effective. I'm going to have to charge more for the houses than I can get a return on. So it's a self-limiting thing, and I think they automatically sort of gravitate that. And I'd have to agree with
Michael, yeah.
Really, we're the county, and I've sat in on a couple of general plans for the city, and that's kind of city thinking because of density levels. I think clusters and things like that in the county, like Hollister Ranch up there on the hill, big buffer area around them, so you don't have to worry about ag penetration. They're on sewer or on septic tanks, and they had to develop their own water company in order to deliver water to each one of the units. So it limits itself.
Yeah.
I think it's a good concern.
Oh.
I just don't think you have to worry about it.
Well, I don't know.
Chair?
We've made about a half dozen mistakes in this county prior to our time on the board and your time on the commission that put developments in places that should never have happened in this county. And we're on the cusp of some real growth. And everybody's out here because they're not, looking at, where this has all happened. And we've made mistakes already. I could take you to developments that have did not have the water, and the county is paying for it. Don't have the sewer, and that's changing in the state, and has degraded groundwater for other, long-established properties. And I just want to make sure we don't keep making that mistake. That's all.
Supervisor Rivas?
Right, so having flexibility in the document, at some point could be a tough pill to swallow, but a self-limiting policy is something I can't swallow at all, unfortunately. And I think that maybe I'm off base here, and this is something that I was going to address during the new study areas, but I think what Supervisor Botello has raised is a good point. This is a county that's made some mistakes, where you have a number of CSAs throughout the county, which is a huge burden to our general fund and to our local tax base and our taxpayers. When I look at LU 4.2, urban residential the development, or future growth, where do we talk about annexation? We're sure this is a document where we want to talk about, or where our goal is a city-centered growth, correct? Where hopefully new development will occur around the city, where hopefully we'll have some type of annexation policy where a development isn't going to be a burden to our county. So where is that in here? And if you can address that to the point where, if I'm looking at a huge development in the future, shouldn't the discussion of incorporation, have some type of bearing throughout this whole process and document? Because the last thing I want is some development that's, in a place, in a rural area, that is far from any type of services that we can provide, such as water or sewer. So am I off base, or, Those are the comments I have, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair, can I just add on to Supervisor Rivas' comment? I think one of the telling things for the purposes of this discussion is the topic heading itself, urban residential development, urban development. we're not talking about a farmhouse or even a couple of homes out in the valley. This is urban development. I think Supervisors Patel and Rivas are saying the same thing. Shouldn't urban development be focused and centered around the existing cities within the county that have the type of infrastructure that can be connected to through the process of annexation and otherwise? In other words, do we want to get away from septic? Do we want to get away from wells when we can? There's always going to be exceptions to that, but to encourage the clustering around the existing cities at 60,000 feet, as you said, shouldn't that be what this general plan is all about?
Well, I think you have two different philosophies with regard to it, and the Board of Supervisors has said, yes, we want to encourage development around the city of Hollister, and they've also said we're willing to look at some new community study areas. So you have two different things. So you can have a new community study area that has urban development in it. It will have to provide adequate public services. That's what this policy says. And if it is not able to provide adequate public services, then you probably won't approve it, because it won't get built. So I think that's where the cross paths are, and you guys have been talking about this long before I walked into this room, right? So we can go back to that discussion. I'm not sure you want to. The board's given direction about the new community study area. So we actually have to deal with it on both levels. So
you're talking about infrastructure for the existing cities and within the community study areas.
Exactly.
I see.
So it's both. And Board Member Rivas raised a really good question, and we do have policy. It's, for those that have the right pages, it starts on page 31, but the title is under City Fringe Areas. So it goes to your comment about the areas that are on the fringes of the city of Hollister, city of San Juan Bautista. And it talks about city sphere of influence expansion proposals, orderly city expansion. It talks about sphere of influence area coordination with the city of Hollister and San Juan Bautista, et cetera. So that piece is discussed in here, and I think it's a good point. And again, you as planning commissioners and board members will have to look at this as policy as you're going through individual developments and say, should this development be in the city? And then there's another whole issue around the whole annexation, and that's this fee that's charged. And that fee has gotten in the way of people wanting to annex and rather come do it in the county. So you're going to have to deal with that, because it doesn't encourage what you're asking about. It encourages people to do the opposite. It encourages them to stay in the county. And that means it's going to be the county's responsibility to pay for the services and all of those kind of things, and have more CSAs and that type of thing. So again, every one of those is individual, but there's an overall arcing policy that needs to be dealt with regard to that. We don't address that fee structure in here. That's an ordinance level, next level down discussion, okay? All right, so we were on 4.2, 4.3, and through 4.7. I'd like to move, unless there's any questions on through 4.7, I'd like to move to 4.8 and 4.9. The next heading is commercial and mixed-use development.
Can we go back? I'm sorry, because I
Sure.
missed something. On the photo, on a lot of these photos, it says 2030 general plan. I believe it's a 2035 general plan.
Sure.
You'll see that throughout a lot of these photos, so I'll try to point them out to you.
Please.
This is one of them, okay?
We'll take a note and
Thank
take
you.
care of that. And just so the board knows, again, we're dealing with a general plan. Ashley and I are dealing with a general plan that was already prepared as a draft. So we're starting with that and trying to clean up the maps and clean up some of the stuff that you're looking for and asking for as part of the direction.
Yeah,
So-
and there was one reference that we drain into the Salinas River. You'll want to change that.
Do you have any idea where that is? Not the Salinas River, but where the reference is. All right, goal L. So the next section is commercial and mixed-use development. The goal is LU5, and this goes through a series of new regional commercial centers, new commercial thoroughfare centers, onto neighborhood centers, vision-oriented commercial use, strip commercial, mixed-use development, and live-work development. So I'd like to look at that section, and there are a few changes in that section. Again, this will relate to the dots on the map. So we don't have the maps for you, but they were on your original general plan map that had the dots. We were going to try and define those, what those dots mean a little bit more for you for the next go-around.
The headings on the new commercial, regional, new commercial thoroughfare, there's inconsistencies between the revised headings and the revised text.
Okay.
Those two sections.
Please, thank you very much. So we'll change that.
Yeah, and Mr. Chairman, I know Supervisor De La Cruz and myself been on the board for a little bit longer than the other 3 supervisors, and this is something we've been trying to get done for about 10 years. So those dots are pretty important.
Yeah, no, the dots are very important, and I know why they're there and why to encourage them. So we'll try to help you define those, and please, you know, we're looking for your feedback when we do define them, because you have been around a lot longer than us. The next section, if there's no questions on through policy 5.7, is employment industrial development. It's LU, goal LU6. This is about employment centers, employment center access, industrial uses, heavy industrial areas. Any questions on that section? Next section is community character, and this has to do with historic preservation, adaptive reuse, new development in historic areas, minimizing parking impacts, dealing with crime, screening, signage, those types of things. It's more of a design, really high-level general design guideline type of thing. If you got a specific plan in, they would have to comply with these things and put them into some kind of design guidelines for their specific plan. Next section is new communities. This is where you would ask us to take off from where the previous general plan consultants had introduced the concept of new community study areas and ask us to give a narrative for each one. We did take the liberty, probably not to some people's liking, but we took the liberty to rename the areas so that they actually have a name that you can relate to in the future. And the first one is the San Juan Study Area. The second one is the Bolsa Study Area. The third one is the Union Study Area. And the fourth one is the Fairview Study Area. So we'd like to get some feedback from the Planning Commission and Board at this point in time if these write-ups are what you were looking for in your board direction.
Mr. Chair, I was looking for something more general instead of specific. I've always been of the mind that the general plan needs to be general, and when we give them specific names instead of an area, I think the wording is, there's too much detail, and it takes away from the flexibility in the general part of the general plan. So that's my thought. I would like to see it be less wordy. And just keep a general description of the new community study area.
Pardon?
Like settings like northeast.
Northeast, perhaps, and without the detail of the area, because once we start putting the detail, then I think we'll go back to what Supervisor Botello is concerned about, that it makes it too specific, and now it's almost like saying, yeah, you can build. I really don't think that we need to do that, but I didn't go back to hear what was the pleasure of this board as a whole. I certainly didn't want to see that myself.
Yeah, one of the things just to note in these descriptions, it does have a name to it, but all of the information for the most part is existing information. So it talks about the location, it talks about boundaries, it talks about land use designations, current existing land use, is it, you know, farmland, or is it rangeland, or, you know, what's it being used for, municipal services that exist in the area, circulation routes that exist in the area. And one of the things in the board direction was, you know, tell us why the GPAC requested this particular area to be a study area. And so we have that section called benefits, which was basically the reasoning behind it's near a major roadway. It can provide urban densities that are not on prime farmlands, or that are on marginal lands, or are, there's water and those types of things available. What was the reason behind the GPAC's thinking? So that's why we have that in there. We can certainly pare this down, but it's mostly existing information, as if you were going to describe what was going on in that general area.
What I do like about this, if I could, Mr. Chair, is that it does say that new communities are not limited to these areas, and the county would consider proposals for new communities in other parts of the county so long as they are planned in accordance with the policies in this section. And that's good, because then it gives us, it doesn't just tie us into those areas, it's just really, we're saying, we will consider new development areas. And so it's broad. I do like that part of it.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Michael, every time we have a discussion about the general plan, we get hung up on these new community study areas. If we were to, and I'm not proposing that at this time, but if we were to just drop them, how would that expedite the whole process, expedite the EIR, and will we be able to get this project done on time and on budget?
I don't think so. I don't think it's going to expedite it one way or the other. I think that what we have in here, I'm very comfortable with what we have in here as being existing information. We could have gone farther, and you as a board could have said, oh, we want these new community study areas, and we want to designate them residential or mixed use or some. You haven't put any designations. You haven't said these are the only study areas. You've identified from the GPAC that there are some particular locations that might be better for growth than others. We're not analyzing them in the EIR for densities, for land use types, or any of that. That'll happen from the 40,000-foot level to the 20 to the 10. It'll happen in a specific plan. It'll happen in a development agreement. It'll happen in service plans and all those things that'll happen after the general plan's adopted. And remember, your specific plan will have zoning in it. So it'll be a specific plan document that probably contains some kind of form-based or hybrid zoning or standard zoning in the plan. So that's the tools you use to kind of drill down to the next level. So I'm very comfortable with the information in here in terms of identifying. I think it's important that the board and the Planning Commission have some kind of name or designation for the study areas they've called out. It doesn't have to be these names. It could be the northwest corner of the county or whatever, but it should be some identifier that was pulled out to make sense. And again, we haven't put anything in here that says what these areas are going to be. We haven't crossed that line. What we've done is said this is what those areas are. Existing land use, existing, infrastructure that's there. Try to keep it pretty general.
Okay, and then I think Supervisor Botello mentioned it earlier. So you kind of gave these area, you mentioned where they are, you designated them. Does that give somebody inside the circle a leg up over someone just on the other side of the circle?
Well, I think, my opinion in a general plan, when you say as a board that you are putting new community study areas in your document, you're opening the door to say that we're taking invitations for new community study areas. And you're taking it one step further and saying there's 4 areas we have identified in the county that we think might work for those. And that's about as far as you've gone. You don't know that they'll work. You don't know that until you get the plans for it. So, and there's a lot of issues around how that will work. So I think you're going just far enough. If you go any farther, you start designating land uses and all those things, yes, Mr. Chairman, it will affect the EIR. If you don't designate land uses and you leave them as you've proposed them, I don't think it will affect the EIR.
Any other questions?
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
With the conversations that you've been just having, and you're talking about leaving it so general, what if you left the verbiage in here, but you didn't draw the circle on the map? and just called out the area, saying in this area, we think that we might find the special study area to work, but not draw the circle on the map, and then let the developer come in with their proposal and say, because of the verbiage in your general plan, we feel this parcel fits.
But Pat,
And that leaves it real general.
doesn't the verbiage define the circle though, Pat?
Not necessarily, because I was in the last public hearing and they were talking about one of the areas by Rocks Road and saying there was no water. This way the developer has the chance to bring it forward and say, yes, there is water and this, and this is my plan. And then like Anthony's question about what about the person across the street? Well, there is no person across the street because you haven't drawn the circle.
But as Margie had stated prior, it encourages new communities anywhere, not just within the group.
And it's stated on the general.
And it's stated on the general plan, so it's,
But then-
even though they put, lines on the map, which are always terrible, but when, it doesn't give it any more power or weight than outside the bubble, because the general plan also says, pick a place, anywhere.
Yeah, but then why put the circle there to begin with?
Some people like circles.
So, board, planning commissioners, tell us where we are. As a staff representative for you, we're comfortable with where this is, and we're comfortable with the direction you gave us for the GPAC designations and the fact that it allows more. You could change the names. You could take the circles off the map. I'm not recommending either one of those. I think you've gone far enough down the road and established enough record to establish this as it is. I think it doesn't go too far. It goes just far enough to give a concept and an invitation for economic development in the community, which is what you asked for. I think a lot of communities we go into where it's not designated in the plan, people don't see it on a map, they're like, well, it's too scary for me. It's too much of a risk. I'm not going to spend my dollars here. So, you have to think about it on all those aspects.
Yeah, I'll make my comments brief. I was the supervisor that recommended these narratives, and I have to thank staff for actually getting the job done. I don't share the view that they need to be more vague because, as Michael stated, this is fact, and and that's what I was looking for. I was looking for, looking back, if I'm not on the board or you have a separate board, a completely a different board, they could look back at these narratives when they do have an applicant before them, and they could look and see what this boundary means. What are the services that are near this boundary? What does a development have to accomplish to make it work and make it cost effective, and for it not to be a burden for future residents, in my opinion, or for existing residents for that matter. So I think that the narratives are great, and I want to thank staff for doing that. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Anyone else?
Just one thing. So let's say we're going to remove the bubbles or the lines or anything else. Does it in any way trigger an EIR or a change in the existing EIR other than some work to the document?
If we remove the bubbles,
Yeah, if we change something within these new community areas by either, probably not the name, but by removing them or by changing the bubble area or removing the lines on the map, does it in any way trigger something that's going to make this go out past December?
I don't think so. I think our goal is to hit December with what we have in this document now. If you change some of the names or some narrative or something, as long as the basic concept is still here, it's driving it. I think that's it. And I want to thank Board Member Rivas for your comments. I happened to be at the dance that day when you were making those comments. I was at the meeting, so it's kind of an old joke about not being in class that day kind of thing. Well, I was in class that day, so I got the benefit of actually hearing your comments and hoping that we were trying to hit the target and not miss the entire wall with the dart. So thank you.
Yeah, and if I
Supervisor
want to just
Petillo?
add, you did a great job with the description of the areas, and what they're named is what they're named. That's, I don't, what concerns me is, like what Supervisor Rivas said, is when we're all gone, and we will be all gone, this document is probably going to still be in effect. And the interpretation, just with the designation, is going to mean something to somebody in the future. I guarantee you that, despite some of the language of, and you're right, you've gone as far as you could go without really giving entitlements. And I have another thought as far as a requirement for maybe something that would take place in these zones that would give me maybe a little bit more level of comfort. And but we have to get there first, and I think that's probably the next part after you're done with the description here, is the requirements of the special community areas.
And Michael, how much more do we have on the new communities?
That's it. I mean, if you as a board and planning commission you've had your discussion back and forth. What I've heard so far is that you're not recommending any change. If there is a recommendation for a change, we need to know that. But I'm ready to move on to.
I want to give the public an opportunity to ask questions or make comments.
Well, we're.
Or do you have another?
No, we're only 4 or 5 pages away from finishing the land use element. So
Okay,
I think
that's what I was trying to get at.
Yeah, I think we can
Where's
get.
going to be the best break?
Right, I think that's a good break.
Okay.
We can have the public comment about the first slide that we put up that had the land use changes, if anybody wants to say anything about that, and then anything about the land use element,
Very
because
good.
they're related to each other.
Very good.
Okay?
So we're okay? All right, then.
Okay, so after new community study areas, and for those that are following along by page, it's 3-28, and it's goal LU8, and it talks about new community purpose, and it's 8.1, 8.2, 8.3, 8.4. So I'd like to hit those and see if there's any comments or concerns about those particular policies.
I'm not there yet. If you could just give me a little time.
Sure.
I think I lost
Maybe if
my
I
place.
could share my second thought then, as far as with for me to swallow these new community areas, personally, I would like to focus growth and development towards the city. If there's a lot of emphasis in this document that really we're not focusing growth and development anywhere. It could happen anywhere in the county. And maybe one provision for me to really be able to accept this is a requirement of the developer going into a conservation easement, TDS, and that would, certainly, provide incentive to try to focus towards the city and towards the water and sewer services. But yet, if you're going to go outside of that area and you're going to have added density, that needs to be bought off of landowners that, are interested in keeping open space and agricultural productive land. We have policies in place that mention that in the document, but I mean, that should be one of the requirements for development. That's really because a developer is getting something. Of course, the cost is probably be passed on to the home, but there'll probably be upscale. It's be something that's be a little bit less diverse socially and economically anyway. So why not?
So I'm not fully clear, Supervisor, on the concept beyond the two things that occur now. One is the policy we talked about earlier, which is ag land preservation, and having the ability of the Planning Commission and Board to request a one-to-one mitigation, if you will, and I'll put quotes around the mitigation, but basically that's a conservation easement typically. If it's not a fee, it's usually a conservation easement. So that's one policy we put in. The other piece of the policy that happens that you don't always see and deal with up front, you'll see it as a part of the environmental process, which is habitat. And we're working on right now on the county's first habitat mitigation bank location in the county. But Fish and Game and Fish and Wildlife are requiring oftentimes 2 and 3 to 1 mitigation on habitat. So if you can't do it on site, they're asking you to go off-site and provide a conservation easement, either on-site or off-site. So you already have 2 levels of conservation easements as a development community that we have under our, when we're doing environmental documents, requiring them to do. So I'm trying to pinpoint from there where you're going.
We know about conservation easements and habitat preservation. I think what Supervisor Botello is suggesting that is an amendment to the requirements section that any and all development that occurs within a special study area shall participate in the LU-4.9 Transfer of Development Credits Program, TDC.
Oh, okay. I know where you are now. Okay, thank you.
Which
Okay.
is already it's already in there, right? So we would just.
No, it's not. It's LU-4.9. It's on page 3-15, and I put a star next to it when we were going through.
No, but I'm saying the TDC is already, so we're just making reference to the TDC section of it.
Right, but as it says, the county shall maintain and implement the voluntary transfer of development program as an incentive to protect farmland. I think what Supervisor Botello is saying is if you're going to develop in one of these communities, these special study areas, there's nothing voluntary about it.
So you have to enroll in it.
It's a
Correct.
requirement.
Well, why are you making such a target area a requirement and in other areas of voluntary?
Well, see, we approved just recently a banking of some TDCs. Somehow we have to develop the market for that. And if we don't develop the market for it through growth and development, then what's the use of banking it anywhere? The landowners aren't reap any benefit for their, TDCs that they had set aside. Somehow you have to, develop this program. This is our opportunity to develop that program. Everybody's a winner. The people that are not in the little bubble and the people that are in the bubble.
Mr. Chair, we have people in the audience that were part of the TDC committee that maybe might want to chime in on this because I want to make sure that we're headed in the right direction with the TDCs because I know that we have plenty on our ordinances already that deal with that. And so I'm just wondering if we're just being redundant here. So I don't know if there's anybody, I know there are people in the audience that may want to chime in.
And I was on the committee for about 7 years.
Okay.
And we found that it's a great program. We did what we could with it. But the problem is, as Scott Fuller will probably tell you, is the farmers don't want to strip entitlements from their land.
Thank you very much.
Okay, and because, yeah, you're looking at a pay and building a trust and everything, that can be transferred over, but if the people that will sell those do not want to strip their land of entitlements, then it's not going to work. So forcing the issue, I don't think is really the way to do it. It might come into its own day, and I think that's what will happen one way or the other. Either it's going to come into its own day or it's not. And it will do it under its own power. But if you force this and force the farmers to strip away, I just don't see it working because there's not a cooperation on the sending end.
Could work in reverse.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, I remember the discussion very well because actually I really want to thank Ray Pierce and the member of the audience, Scott Fuller, because I was against the program. And Supervisor Patel, I was against the program. And we all reached a compromise. And it came out a good program. And Commissioner Pierce is correct, is let it grow on its own. Let it generate its interest on its own. If you really want to go in that direction, then maybe it's time to open up that can of TDS discussion again and change the language now.
We just banked TDCs from Pagan Hill, that development. I don't know how many units that was, but there's a bank. There is some units there. We have had people speak on conservation programs down in South County. Some are for, some are against that rangeland conservancy, you know. And if, you know, am I going to sell my development unit to a developer? I own farmland. I don't intend to develop it or split it or whatever, but I have those rights. I could supposedly split my land to 5 acres, supposedly. Can't do it really in actuality. I know what but am I going to sell it for $5,000? Probably not. I'd rather hold on to it. But now you turn around and offer me $30,000, it might be a different circumstance. I know a lot of ranchers down in South County that would like to keep ranching, but when they have to pass on the farm or the ranch, they're strapped with taxes, and that's happening to a family in San Juan that I know of. This might be a good mechanism and tool to, you know, be able to keep their operation. But if we don't require it somewhere along the lines, or it's not going to work, Ray. And I'm saying put it on the developer's back or the property owner who's getting the density. I would love to have 1 acre parcels on where I live. That'd be great. How do you?
And I agree to a certain degree with you. The problem is when you strip the land of entitlements. Let's say you have a larger farmer that's farming the land and it's productive. He goes out for a loan every year. Once you strip the entitlements and the appraiser knows about it, they check title and it's recorded on their title. Now he doesn't get the loan value that he could if that wasn't stripped. And that's probably the bigger issue.
There's a balance.
I agree with you. It'd be good with but this doesn't stop the little guy, you or anyone else, from selling or saying, hey, I have these to sell if you want to use them. And then the developer comes in and uses them if he needs them. Like, I'm not sure completely about Scott's project, but I believe he's increased his densities on his project by using TDCs.
Botany that, though.
Okay, so he bought his own.
Okay. Michael,
Silver Ranch?
in the discussion of the new communities, is it stated that the county shall encourage the use of the TDC credits?
No, it's not, Mr. Chairman, and that's what I was also going to suggest. I think you hit it. We could just put it somewhere in here that it'd be one of the criteria to be looked at as an encourage, and
I would like that in there.
refer back to the policy that already exists.
I think that would be.
Yeah,
we'll
I mean,
just-
we're trying to keep it flexible, we're trying to keep the word required out of the
Right.
document. So let's say shall encourage the
Yeah,
use of the
or not even shall, just encourage the development community to use TDCs and refer back to policy 4.9 or whatever it was, land use 4.9. And then it's a tool, like any other tool that you have. A development agreement's a tool, a specific plan's a tool. That's, you know, those types of conservation easements are tools that you have, and then you can pick and choose as you're negotiating with that particular property owner or development community.
All right, as long as it's in this section right there, that's the best I could get, I'll take it.
Mr. Chairman,
He'd like require, but he'll take encourage.
Supervisor Rivas?
for the record, I would put a required, Mr. Botello, so, but I'll live with encourage.
Okay, so
Thanks.
So with that said, then, the new community area policies, again, are 8.3, 8.4, 8.5, and 8.6 through 8.8. If there's any questions about those, I'll take them now. If not, I'll move to fringe areas and goal LU9, which is the last goal of the land use element before we take time to hear from the public, or take a break, however you want to do that.
Mr. Chair, there's just an area that needs to be corrected. There's reference made to the San Benito County Police Department.
Yeah.
If you could change that to, and that is when you're showing the, not describing, but, yeah, I guess you are describing the areas.
Is it under the title of city fringe areas?
No, it's above that, I believe. I'm
There's at least
not sure where I'm
three
at,
or
but there's
four
several
different-
areas where you want to
there's three or
change
four.
that to
Okay,
San
we'll
Benito
do a
County
word
Sheriff's
search.
Department.
San Benito Police Department, okay.
Okay? And there are several areas where that's,
Okay, we'll catch
Stated.
those.
okay.
And then LU 9, orderly city expansion. This is the policy section we talked about earlier. And it again includes orderly city expansion, city sphere of influence expansion proposals. Sphere of influence area coordination is 9.3, and it goes down through 9.9. And it really deals mainly with Supervisor Patello's conversation earlier and Supervisor Rivas' conversation earlier about the annexation process and you know, that city-county cooperation. So if there's any questions in that section,
Mr. Chair, I hate to go back, but this is going so fast that I'm missing some of the areas that I had identified as areas that I wanted to see maybe a different wording on it.
Sure.
And this is before the L9. There's reference to the San Benito County Water District, Hollister Urban Area EAR places a potential water treatment plant in the study area towards the northeast. And it really is now, it's been determined that it's in the west side of the, so that needs to change. So that it,
under what policy is it?
it isn't on the policy. Again, it's when you're, the description of the area, and let me go back to see what the title is. It's section 3, and it's in reference to the Union Study Area.
Oh, it's the Union Study Area?
Yeah,
Okay, yeah, just give us those changes quickly, go through them, and just, we'll hit them.
And like I said, it talks about the treatment plant in the study area towards the northeast, near the city of Hollister city limits, but I don't know if you're, it makes it seem like it's in the northeast part of the county, but it's on the west side of the county. So you
Okay.
just need to change that or find out where exactly it is. Right, Supervisor Munzer? It's on the west side of the county.
Well,
the new treatment.
it's the west side of this, of Hollister. I'm
of
not quite
Hollister.
sure. Yeah,
The
I
west
guess,
side of
yeah, it would,
Hollister.
yeah. It's still
Not
the
on
west
the
side of the
northeast
county.
side.
Got it. And that's the sewage treatment.
And then you were going to allow us to go to that photograph that you changed for the changes you gave us at the beginning of the
Right,
meeting?
right above goal LU 8 is the photograph with the circle in it.
Right. And I'd like to recommend that the county shall encourage new communities to be planned and designed to maximize both ag and environmental impacts.
Where the highway's going through.
Ag and...
To minimize, I'm sorry, not maximize, I read it wrong. To minimize both ag and environmental impacts.
This is the westbound lanes, and this is the east.
You have that? Okay, got that? Next one?
That's it, thank you.
All right?
I think I caught up.
And just go through, if you, Supervisor, if you have anything else, just let us know as we're going through here. So we're back to LU 9. Any questions on LU 9? And then what follows LU 9 is the implementation programs for those. They're intended to implement the land use policies. It's not critical that you look at those. I'm just pointing out that they are there. Because we haven't had as much time as we'd like to go through all of those, some of them may have some inconsistencies. There may be some minor modifications to those as we go through and compare them to the policies. And again, that's just kind of a whole nother exercise. We've done it once, but we usually like to do it 2 or 3 times to catch everything. So there may be some minor errors here or there, so we'll do that, make sure. Yeah, and there was a couple of changes on, on the errata that we originally talked about when we got everybody lost in the beginning, and now you're found. Land Use Implementation Program, LUB. So LUB, Agricultural Mitigation Program, there was some, the way you have it in your document, it should be looked at as if it is in the errata sheet. See it in the errata sheet. Because we are basically making it consistent with the policy, and it's inconsistent with the policy. And then LUI was also inconsistent with the policy, so we made a change on that one.
Okay. Is everyone good with that? All right.
We're at the end of the land use
Okay.
element.
Then I'll open it up to the public for any questions or comments from the public.
Yeah, that's the one. Second page, yeah, right there.
Do we have any speakers cards?
It's the toughest one. We need to take
Have speakers cards, or am I the first one?
this. Sure.
I'm auctioning this off. Marty Richmond from the City of Hollister. Congratulations. I think we made some progress. You know, I've been bombarded, and it certainly came up today 100 times, about the story about the farmland. Everybody talks about the farmland. There's a lot of discussion when we talk about roads in the farmland and development in the farmland. So I went to the state of California, and I got 30 years of records about the farmland here. And you know, the records about the farmland don't seem to comport with what everybody thinks about the farmland. So maybe the state has no idea what it's doing. But in 30 years, according to the state, we lost, the state seems to get a pretty accurate GIS, because they say in 30 years, they only could find 1 acre that shifts, so that was probably water. But yeah, there was a lot of farmland that went away. But that farmland that went away did not go to urban development. In 30 years, urban development only had an average increase of 140 acres a year, where farmland had an average decrease of 1,300 acres a year. So the urban development only took 10% of the farmland decrease. What happened to the other 90%? Since you know the story, the land is valuable because God doesn't make it anymore. So here's what happened to it. Well, 55% of it shifted into grazing land. You can't blame us poor city dwellers for that. And 33% of it shifted into what's called other land. Well, what is other land? Well, it turns out that only 8 counties in the entire state of California actually track the other land, and we are not one of them. So we do not know where that went. But here's where it might have gone: rural residential, semi-agricultural and rural commercial, confined animal agriculture, vacant or disturbed land, or non-agricultural and natural vegetation. Those are other lands. And in 30 years, a whole bunch of 11,000 acres moved from agriculture to other lands. So I suggest, if you want to do something for the future, that we become the 9th county in California to track other lands, so we know where the ag is going, and we do not keep blaming it on the urban expansion, because it's not going to the city. Thank you for your time.
Okay. Is there anybody else that'd like to, if you'll fill out a speaker card afterwards?
Go to Santa Clara County.
Good evening, Bill Wiseman. I'm with Kimley Horn Consultants, and I'm with representing the Lico family, and they're here tonight. A couple things. First off, real briefly. First off, I want to thank you for recognizing we submitted a letter with respect to the clarifications, and I want to thank you for recognizing those, and it sounds like those will be addressed. Secondly, I want to say Michael Groves and Ashley and EMC are doing an incredible job. This is a hard project. I'm not sure I would ever want to take this on. These guys are doing fantastic, so I just want to applaud them for their efforts. Last thing is very minor, and that is we had made a recommendation, and this isn't a big deal, but I just think a little broader interpretation. If you look on LU 6.3, industrial uses, and I give you a little time to pull that up, that policy looks at encouraging industrial uses, and it uses a reference to ag, and just in the context of thinking about this county, and it's not just ag that you are, particularly as it relates to your infrastructure of roadways and your airport. I just would recommend, and I can provide this language, and if they don't do it, it's not a big issue, but just sort of broadening that policy. And so I'll just read it with the insert that we had recommended, and again, as it comes. The county shall encourage industrial land uses to locate in areas that would not pose significant land use conflicts and in a manner appropriate to the type of industrial activity proposed, such as industry in direct support of agricultural operations in agricultural areas. And we would just recommend maybe you add that to also say, and general light industrial services near existing and proposed transportation infrastructure, e.g. highways, arterial roads, rail, and airports. Just recognizing the fact that industrial uses aren't just ag-related, but they're actually much broader than that. So it's a minor point, just an insertion for your consideration. Thank you very much, and I appreciate all your efforts. This is going to be a long night.
Mr. Chair, may I ask Michael if that would be a significant change that would, because it would be appropriate and...
It is an appropriate change.
It is not?
It is.
It is, okay.
Yes, and it wouldn't add anything that we need to do for the EIR.
I would recommend it, Mr. Chair, if the rest of the board is in favor.
I'll support it, Mr. Chair.
Good with that? Okay.
Yeah.
Scott Fuller from San Juan Oaks. I had a question to the chair, and maybe this is for Michael Groves, regarding the comments that were received on the original draft EIR that was circulated. So I'm assuming that when you're done with the new draft, it will be recirculated. Is that correct?
That's the plan.
Okay. And so what about the original comments that were received? How are those dealt with?
So for the record, Michael Groves, basically we've gone through all of the comments that have been received on the EIR and on the general plan. Our intention is to, after we craft this general plan, is to recraft the EIR, in essence rewrite the EIR, and we'll take into account the comments that we've received previously, but we're also going to rewrite it with the direction of the board. So if a comment said, you know, go left, and the board said go right, we're going to write the document based on the go right direction. But when you write the EIR, you still have to look at impacts and mitigation. So you still have to look at, are those directions going left or going right causing impacts, and what are the mitigations? So our intention, so for the Planning Commission, board, and the public, is that we will rewrite the EIR using the existing draft that was there and the comments that came on that draft, and republish it to go out for public review again. So the public will have a chance to comment on the general plan and the EIR again. And we're hoping that we'll have a lot more of the issues resolved that came up the last time by going through it this time.
Okay, thank you. And then I just want to mention, it sounds like the TDC thing might be resolved, but it could come back up. One thing is on the idea of Supervisor Botello about the new community study areas utilizing TDCs. If you're going to make it a requirement for all the increased density, then you would have to go back and open up the TDC and create sending and receiving areas, which is where that was discussed previously and was decided. A, that was difficult. B, that does have the potential to create winners and losers, as you brought up on another issue about new community study areas, because creating sending and receiving areas can be seen as creating winners and losers also. But, so that's sort of where the board and the TDC committee sort of made it more of a voluntary program. But if you were going to look at that, you would have to go through the county and create the sending and receiving areas. Whereas what you've done tonight, and I think sort of goes along with the intent of the program, that a developer can use TDCs, and it provides some political pluses and can be used in a development agreement negotiations, which I think is beneficial. So, thank you.
Anybody else from the public would like to comment or ask any questions at this point? Seeing none, then, Michael, let's go forward.
All right, so we're going to go to the next element, which will be, your pages will be numbered 4, the economic development element.
Oh, you know what? Actually, we've been,
break?
yes, there's been a request to take a break, so we'll take let's reconvene at 8:15.
just for the politics of it, I expect it to work.
If we have everybody, or the major players in the room, maybe we can go ahead and get going again.
Okay.
Let's see, actually, we don't have Supervisor Barrios.
Didn't you text me?
Byron? Byron, do you want to check and see if Margie's in the lobby?
Yes, surely. You know, sure.
While we're waiting for Supervisor Barrios, I just wanted to apologize, but I have a commitment. I have to leave. I wanted to get through the land use element. I'll communicate with Supervisor Botello about the rest of the meeting, but I apologize. I got to
Okay,
take off.
all right, very- thank you.
And I'll see the commissioners on April 2.
Thank you for making the commitment tonight to be here.
Yeah, you're
Appreciate
welcome.
it.
Yeah, you bet. And if you have anything, just give me a call.
Okay.
Do you have my number?
I don't.
Sorry.
Waiting for Margie. One thing I wanted to accomplish from the Planning Commission's perspective is what does the board want the Planning Commission to do in this process?
Okay.
What are their expectations? What are the milestones? What do you know?
Very good.
We need a roadmap. We don't know what we're doing.
Very good. That's very good. Yeah, thank you. Here's my card. Okay.
All right,
All
I
right,
think we're
we're
ready,
ready?
good to go.
Mr.
All right,
Chair?
the next,
Hang on, Michael.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Going page by page on the land was very important. I was wondering if we could go more at a faster pace now that really the land element was very detailed.
Oh, I think we're going at a faster pace. We got the,
Okay.
my notes.
Oh, you got tones, okay.
More things.
All right, I'm okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
and Mr. Chairman and board members, planning commissioners, that's our intention now on this next element. It's a very short element, so thank you for the comment. Economic development element, really the only changes to the economic development element are to encourage and give more information about the wine trail. So that's really the only comments in there. And so you basically have, I want to call it 5 or 6 pages of the economic development element with very few changes in it other than the wine trail. So I would ask the planning commissioners and board members if they have any comments on the full economic development element.
Okay, does anyone have any notes or comments on this section?
I'm sorry, something
Okay.
just came to mind. I remember that Casa de Fruta came in, but they're in there, and I just wanted to make sure, because that was one of the concerns that they had kind of
The-
been left out.
Yes,
Yeah, but
the
they're in
north,
there. I
the
see.
north area for the
north
wine
area
is in there,
okay.
yes.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay,
Yeah, and and remember, we committed to adding another map to the general plan that'll enlarge the wine trail and show the wine trail, including that north area.
Commissioner Pierce?
Under tourism, second graph, Pinnacles National Park now. It's not a monument any longer.
You see it?
Which
Which-
park was it?
Could you say it one more time, so we'll just make sure we're
Under
clear?
tourism, ahead of, it's below ED 4.6.
What's the economic section?
And then tourism, then the second graph, and the third to the bottom line says Pinnacles National Monument, Pinnacles National Park.
Yeah, maybe if you can do a word search.
Yeah.
And
So
make sure
monument.
a monument is changed
Yeah.
to park.
Yeah, it's a
in the
national
document.
park map.
This is under the photo as well over on the next page.
Perfect.
Comments or questions from the board?
I have a comment.
We've got it. Thank you, that's awesome.
Commissioner Rodriguez?
Yes, for economics, that section between San Felipe and Highway 25 all the way to North County, that should have been some like multi-use type of development, because everybody wants all the industrial to go to the North County instead of South County, and I didn't see that anywhere.
Okay, and that would be under land use you're talking about, or just under economic
For
development?
economics, yeah.
To encourage
The development for all the industrial and commercial in the North County between San Felipe and Highway 25, all the way to the border of Santa Clara.
If the board and planning commission would like us to add something to the element to encourage that type of development at the north end of the county, we can do that. It's not, I don't believe it's currently in here.
Because we're talking,
Ask the question, Mr. Chair? Are you referring to just, well, because we have the corridors that are at the major thoroughfares that you are talking about, 156, 25, 152, 101. So we do have that in the commercial corridor or commercial thorough. So we have made reference to that. Is that what you meant?
well,
What you mean? Because it's already addressed.
yeah, because see, like on that, we're talking about farmland, prime ag land.
Right,
All that land in that area is not prime ag land.
right.
It's kind of, you can't do much on there. The water table's so high, maybe get in commercial business or industrial business instead of trying to put development of homes. And from some of the planning commission meetings, everybody wants all the business to go into North County. So we don't have to drive, well, whatever industrial business or all the way to South County.
Well, there's a section in the economic development element calling new business attraction, and I don't know whether we want to add something on that or you don't want to add anything. And it's also discussed, you know, as you said, the industrial is discussing the land use element. So
I guess, Mr. Chair, would that add any teeth to that concept, or is that a general statement that we need to incorporate? I kind of understand what Mr. Rodriguez is expressing his feelings were, because, you know, recent situations we had, you know, such as John Smith landfill, where there were a lot of members of the public saying, you know, don't develop here, you know, develop where all the highways are at, where all the roads, the airport, that part of the section. Maybe add some teeth to it to say we encourage and we recommend that the development does occur in that section of the community.
It's already encouraging it along the corridors.
Okay.
Do you want it to permeate deeper?
Yeah, I
in
guess that's the
corridors?
question. That's Mr. Rodriguez. Do you want it to expand further than the areas where they
Further,
interconnect?
yes, than just the corridors.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
I think that's a land use component, and it's going to increase the EIR, isn't it? Because it's going to be basically another study.
yeah, I would not recommend at this point in time putting any new land use designation to accomplish the goal that you're trying to achieve. What I might suggest is under land use, under LU6, and I hate to go backwards, but we have employment centers, employment center access, industrial uses, which Mr. Weissman talked about in terms of expanding that category to be, you know, industrial uses next to major roadways, being general light industrial and those types of things. That might be a good place for us to suggest that the Highway 25 corridor at the north end of the county is a prime area for that as an example. We could just put it in as an EG and an example of where that might go along a major corridor, and that might help suggest what you're talking about in terms of using that area. Does that make any sense?
Yes, does
Okay.
make sense.
So let's,
Mr. Chair, that might actually be a good compromise, because, I mean, I'll be the first to admit, I do work out in that neighborhood, and there's a lot of individuals that like to build in that part of the community. That's true. And that language, if it doesn't create any dollars or time into it, actually, it's a good compromise to work with, if it's okay with the board and the commission.
Board comfortable with that?
Can you tell me specifically again where this wording is going to refer to?
6.3 in the land use element under industrial uses. One of the speakers, Mr. Bill Weissman, came up and talked about adding some language to the end of that would talk about general industrial uses.
Right.
And we have, in that section, it talks about both industrial uses, and then there's another section that talks about technology and those types of things. And I think the suggestion is there's possible areas at the north end of the county where you could develop some job centers that would be good growth for job and revenue generation for the county. And so I'm just suggesting that we just say that as an example. We're not writing it into the policy that you need to encourage or shall, or you just say as an example, the Highway 25 corridor leading to Santa Clara County is a good location for, generating jobs or providing additional industrial growth, as long as it's planned and,
Now, that's a scenic highway, I
No.
believe.
No,
It- huh?
no.
It isn't?
No.
Okay, I thought it was, so.
The
It starts,
Highway 25 is on the list eligible south of Tres Pinas. The Highway 25 north of Hollister is not
not, okay.
even on the eligibility list.
Okay.
So it's.
So 6.3 and 6.4 are industrial uses and sustainable technology. So I think those two policies work together towards that suggestion. So it might be,
Commissioner
Also,
Pierce?
under the conditional use, if it's ag-related, manufacturing, industrial, or any of those other ones under conditional use, they're already available. It's already acceptable to do any of those uses. So are you talking about putting in an Apple computer store, or?
No, just.
Are you talking about non-ag-related manufacturing, industrial?
Like, encourage the business to come down, non-related, I mean, they're closer to the.
Okay. Because we do it already under conditional use, but it has to be ag-related.
Yeah, that's his point, I think, non-ag.
all
Michael,
right,
you have-
we have enough information to
You got
take that
okay.
forward. So
So, any other questions on the economic development element?
I do. There's a picture here of a bed and breakfast in Benicia, California. We have our own bed and breakfast now downtown. It would be nice to not put somebody else's picture in here, but put a picture from our own county.
that's fine. Yeah, again, we didn't put these in, so
No, I understand, but now that we have one, this bed and breakfast is pretty new.
does anybody have a picture of the new bed and breakfast they can send us, or do we have to go out and take one?
I can take one and send it.
I mean, we're promoting our own area, so.
Right.
Michael, if we don't get you a picture, then don't worry about it.
No, please worry about it.
Well, we have to get it for them.
Yeah, I'd like to put it in, so,
I would do.
Okay.
Good point.
Okay.
yeah, but I can't take it tonight, so. All right, we'll figure that out.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Can I open this up? Can I open this up to the public for any?
Let's actually do a couple elements and then open it up again.
Okay, all right.
And then come back. So the circulation element, and the reason I want to jump to that is there's not a whole lot of comments in the circulation element either. And it's a pretty straightforward element. We have some minor revisions in various places with regard to language changes that we felt were important based on how we read it and how it was written. But most of those are basic language changes. So I would just ask, does anybody have any comments on the circulation element? It's about 12 pages long.
Any questions or comments of the board?
We used up all our comments on it.
You guys have beat circulation to death, or maybe it was just land use that you did that too?
Just want to make sure the Hollister pictures.
Okay. I'm taking that we are good on the circulation? Okay.
And then public facilities and services element, if I may, is pretty straightforward as well. There's not very many changes to this. A few minor modifications in a couple of places for wording purposes, wordsmithing. There was one part of is this part of the errata? One part of the errata is PFS 3.9 was inconsistent in the back. So we changed, is this coming from the back or no?
No, it's just a clarification on the terminology from Title 22 and SB 610.
And that's also where the Salinas River is mentioned.
Yeah, and I had 3.9, is the coordination, in my notes, coordination with the water agencies. Now I'm trying to get to 3.9. But, so you made some corrections on 3.9?
Correct. So now it would read, the county shall require new developments to prepare a source water sufficiency study and water supply analysis for use in preparing where required, a water supply analysis per SB 610, and a source water assessment per Title 22. This shall include studying the effect of new development on the water supply of existing users. The county encourages the development of integrated regional water management plans or similar plans.
Just makes it more technically correct in terms of the language. And where was the Salinas River comment?
It's,
3.57.
3.57.
Not 3.57, it's 5.7.
Oh, 5.7.
no, it's not 5.7. It's on that same page, though.
It's somewhere.
At the bottom of that page.
Oh, I
right,
see it.
yep.
Runoff of the county eventually flows to the Pajaro River, Salinas River, or the Central Valley stormwater drainage systems.
And South County
Central
does.
Valley. I don't know why I would say any of
South
those.
County does flow to Central Valley.
Okay.
They
South
probably meant to say
South
San
County
Benito.
flows to Central
Yeah,
County.
let's just clarify that.
Yeah, I think if you just take out Salinas River.
Okay.
Okay, we got that changed.
You know, Supervisor Patello, isn't one of the issues with the Citadel project is because they flow into the Salinas River basin over there?
I don't think so. I think the San Benito River flows into Apollo, and Apollo.
No, but out towards Bitterwater. Yes.
Oh.
I think there is a small section of my district.
It's his district. Try to give it a hit, Anthony. Leave it alone.
Every day.
All right, so we're putting Salinas River back in?
Put Salinas River
All right,
back in.
there we go.
But you want to add San Benito River? Anthony?
Yes,
I think
yes.
maybe San Benito River ought to be mentioned.
Yep.
Yeah.
Even though it's just a
It is the,
Okay, so any other comments on this public facilities and services element?
there's an area here, Mr. Chair, that it talks about the, and I can't find it, but the, let me go see if I, the best management practices. And
Oh, sure.
you crossed off the low-impact development. But
Right.
that low-impact development is a title someplace else, and I can't find it. And-
Yeah,
And I
we'll-
guess it shouldn't be.
We'll do a search for that, and the purpose of that is best management practices is the better way to handle that.
Yes, exactly.
Low-impact development is only one tool under best management practices.
Yeah, so if you could go back and, I don't know where it is, because I didn't make note of it, but I remember seeing it, so,
And it is included on the errata. It's coming up in the
Oh, it
natural
is?
resources section,
Okay.
yeah.
thank you.
Okay,
And we'll
Commissioner-
make sure we search and make sure they're consistent.
Okay. Mhm.
Both there and in the implementation.
Thank you.
Commissioner
sections.
Lowe?
Michael, on the comments here on the transfer station, we have no transfer stations in San Benito County. Is that just in there as general? It's PFS 7.2.
Yeah, the county shall provide adequate transfer station facilities that meet local demands, including recycling facilities, and avoid conflicts with surrounding uses. I think, again, we didn't put it in, the previous consultants put it in. They probably put it in for general purposes so that if there were an encouragement for transfer stations, most counties have transfer stations, so, you don't have to haul as long, so the garbage haulers are taking it to a station and then somebody else is taking it, so now all the trucks are going to the one location that's a long ways away. It may not be relevant for the county, but it's probably good long-term policy.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay, so do we have any other questions or comments on the public facilities and service element? Okay. Seeing none?
I think it's a good time
For,
with those in mind, economic development, circulation, and public facilities and services, those three elements, to see if
Okay.
there's any comments.
If anybody from the public would like to comment on the three elements that we just went through.
He only gets 3 minutes, right, Mr. Chair?
I think he used 3 minutes and 15 seconds last time. so
I'm
he gets
sorry.
2 minutes.
I owe you
45
15 seconds. I think we're moving along well now. I'll try to be brief. I want to comment on the circulation section. First of all, I want to thank whoever consultant who was responsible for the traffic studies in the EIR, because they are absolutely superior. In detail, by road, by section, by flow, what direction, what percentage is trucks. It's an outstanding job and allows you to look at the draft EIR, the traffic section, and really analyze what's going on. It also has, of course, the famous level of service, which is miserable at peak hours for everybody. I just want to say, and I think I'm not exaggerating, if we don't solve the transportation issue for this county, nothing in this general plan is going to happen. We are at level EE for peak on 156. We are on EF for peak hours on Route 25 right now without any additional people. I cannot tell you how important it is that we solve this issue. And and that means that both of those proposals, which are really kind of support the general plan, have to be put through. We simply have got to get the transportation. One of the things I did analysis on the data, which surprised me, and I wasn't prepared for this, is two things. One is the amount of flow that's going toward 101 that exceeds the flow coming back on 156, which means that's interregional traffic. It's coming up from the valley. When you look at 25, the flow back and forth is within 3 or 4% of each other every day. But when you look at 156, the flow going to 101 is 11% more than the flow coming back every day, which means that's interregional traffic that's coming up from the valley. Also, 156 is carrying 14% trucks, and 25 is only carrying 10% trucks, which means, again, and finally, the third one that was shocking to me was 2,000 more trips disappear between 101 and Union Road than between 101 and Alameda, which means going both directions, which means that those trucks are going down from 101 to Alameda or the other way around and getting off of 156. They're using those lanes to turn. Where they're going, I don't know, whether they're going to a processing plant, whether they're using the back roads, something. It's amazing. 2,000 a day. Thank you for your time.
There's a lot of trucks that use the back roads. It's a huge problem. It is.
Good evening, Chairman Munzer, Planning Commissioners, Board of Supervisors. My name is Christina Chavez-Wyatt, Executive Director of San Benito County Business Council. I have a simple request regarding the economic development element, that every reference to the San Benito County Chamber of Commerce and Visitors Bureau is accompanied by "and the San Benito County Business Council." Thank you.
That's fair, Mr. Chair.
That will cost you a fee of $100 per reference. No, actually, I'm only kidding.
That's fair, Mr. Chair.
Any other comment from the public on these three elements? Seeing none, Michael, let's keep going.
Do we go back and make reference to the request that was asked about the Business Council?
Well, I saw, okay, I guess we need to buy off on that.
Yeah, we
So,
need to make sure that we're all in agreement that if that's going to happen, that, which are the ones that are mentioned, Michael? The Chamber of Commerce? Is the Downtown Association also mentioned?
Yeah, I'll have to go back and look. I don't have it off the
I
top of my
don't
head. Do you
remember.
have it in front of you?
Are we leaving anybody else out? I guess that's what I want to make sure we don't. Yeah. But in any event, Mr. Chair, if we can make, I would recommend that we make reference to the Business Council, and if we think of any other organization that we have left out that is critical to the economic development of the county, we need to let Michael know or bring it back to the board, so.
I think it's under ED 7.1.
Mr. Chair, there's actually multiple locations that it's located in there, and they're kind of, there's some that mention the One Stop Career Center when appropriate, and there's
That's
others
what
that
this
mention
one
the Wine
does.
Growers Association when appropriate. But if we want to include Business Council anywhere where there's Chamber of Commerce, maybe that's inappropriate.
Because it does say these stakeholders shall include but not limited to. I don't know, are we trying to be all-inclusive with it, or?
Well, but since it's been brought to our attention, I don't see why not. They are a critical part of our community, and if we leave anybody else out, it's okay, because it does make reference, right, that there may be others.
So do we want to add the Hollister Downtown Association and the San Diego County Business Council?
I would recommend that.
Okay, can I speak to that? I'm the vice chair of the Downtown Association, and we're for economic development, but we're very closely zoned into the downtown itself, rather than the county, and this is a county document. Does that make sense? And I don't want to speak for my board, but
No, I think it's fine to actually add the
I do.
downtown, because the county encompasses the city, so it doesn't, they don't have to be
cities
separate.
in the county, don't let them know that.
They didn't know that, but they are.
Okay,
You're really mad when
so are we good with that? Okay, and let's move on to the natural and cultural resource element, is that correct?
Natural and cultural resources element. Natural cultural resources element is section 8, and it begins on 8.1 for those that are following by page. And I just ask if there's any comments or questions about this element or section of the general plan. There's two pieces to it. One is about open space and habitat and that type of thing, and the other is about cultural resources. There is a few errata. There's a errata for 4.2 that you should have in front of you, a errata for 4.7, 6.4, those three. 4.2, 4.2, 4.7, and 6.4 are the errata that we handed out tonight.
I have a question back at NCR 1.3 on the open space overlay districts, where we've listed scenic highway corridors, parks and recreation uses, and all of that. I'm wondering if a golf course would be considered, and I'd really kind of like Scott's input on this if it's not out of line. Because I'm kind of thinking, he's got a project coming forward, and
What number?
it's on NCR-1.3, but it just would include, as part of an open space overlay district, maybe a golf course. I'm thinking that's kind of an open space, even though it has a recreational use. And I'd like to know if the rest of the commissioners and supervisors consider that to be consistent.
What page are you looking at? 4?
I'm on 8-2, but it's NCR 1.3, open space overlays.
Would you like Scott to speak to that, Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, sure. Should I come up there or just?
Yes, Scott, yeah, come on up.
While we're waiting, Mr. Chair, just want to point out that the current open space overlay district encompasses much of the county, and it basically requires a use permit for any use that's not recreational or agricultural. So, for instance, a single-family dwelling in the open space district requires a use permit. It's an administrative use permit with the county staff. It doesn't go to the planning commission, but that's where that's how this is implemented in the ordinance now.
Mr.
Kinda
Chair.
wondering about new development, and if it's part of all new development, if you would designate something like that overlay. How do you feel about it, Scott? You're a stakeholder.
I guess I see a golf course as different from the uses listed here. And, you know, there's private golf courses, there's public golf courses. Golf courses often have homes, you know, on the fairways, or if they don't have them now, they want them later. So I'm not sure that would fit under these other uses here. Yeah, I think it's a little different myself. So, thank you.
Scott?
Mr. Chair, there's also mention again of the Pinnacles National Monument in this section.
Yes, I think
So
they would,
they're going to go back and check.
they're going to
We'll do a
work
word
check for
search.
monument.
I have an idea. We're dealing with the closure of the Clear Creek roads that are an easement, county easement roads. And is there any way, and somebody mentioned this when we had one of our meetings, that they thought that we could designate those roads as a trail. Is it possible to do it here, or is this, and talk about that? And or would there be any changes? I mean, it's not, it would be just designating them as trails and not really making any changes to the road? Is this an appropriate time?
I think it is an appropriate time. I think you will have another layer of implementation of that as a trail in terms of easements or right-of-ways or designating a trail master plan by some other resolution or something that would follow the general plan. But I think if you, and we don't really necessarily have I don't think we have a trail system map in here for the county at this point, that I remember. So it would be something new. So it would be something that's not in the existing plan, not necessarily in our scope, but I think it makes some sense that we could, if you had some, and I think I heard the conversation you were talking about at the board.
Yes.
And I know why you're doing it. I think I know why you're doing it.
I know why I'm doing it.
Okay, so I think it would make some sense if you want to do that, to designate them on some kind of a map. If staff is willing to give us exactly what you're talking about and saying, here's what we want designated, we could create a policy in a section saying that and it would probably go in the circulation element. I mean, it might go in natural resources, maybe some reference to it, but it would go in one of those two places.
Would that be costly to add that?
It's, you know, you already gave us some leeway with the budget with regard to doing some new mapping. It's really a mapping exercise. Yes, we'll write a policy. It's, you know, Ashley and I probably can do it in 30 minutes, you know, figure that piece out. The mapping is harder. But you gave us some additional budget to figure that out. So
This would be the time to do it. I mean, we want our easement roads to be accessible. We want them to be open to the public.
Right.
And this would be a good time to really kind of dig our heels and say, these are our roads.
yeah,
So
it's the general plan is, because we can set it up as policy, it's putting a line in the sand basically and saying, this is what we want.
That's what I would like to see us do.
And-
And if we do it at this level, then we've made a statement that these,
Right.
because they mentioned the Rubicon Trail over in the, I think Tahoe area or in the El Dorado County area, and we could do the same thing. So, okay, I'd like to recommend that, Mr. Chair,
So
if it's feasible without,
I have two concerns. What does a trail mean? Does that mean no motorized vehicle, or does, and
it's more
and
of
the,
a historical thing.
okay,
It's a
and
historical thing for the county.
okay,
historical
the other thing that kind of comes to mind for me is I have several dirt roads, and one which is Panoche Road at the Jackass grade, I think goes through BLM land on both sides of the road. Have we ever, does that road need to be established? Is that the county road? Steve?
now we got the guy with all the answers.
Yeah, right, okay. Gotta wake me up first. Panoche Road has never come into question, that in terms of whether it's ours or theirs or BLM's. We have maps that have been adopted with the county road network on that identify Clear Creek Roads, Panoche Road as well. One more. So we already have those maps, so just having other maps might help, might not, I don't know. But we already actually have maps that identify our road network. The Clear Creek roads are on those, designating them as a trail. I'm not exactly sure how that differs from what we already have. We would do it once again. But down in Panoche, those are our roads that have been designated in the same fashion on our maps.
Right.
And
So,
our system
so
maps.
today they're claiming Clear Creek. Is tomorrow they're going to claim Panoche because that's going through their land? I don't know. Maybe this is not the right time for this discussion, but at some point I think we need to make sure whatever hoops we have to jump through to establish these, especially these dirt roads, that they are our roads.
Well, to be perfectly honest with you, the entire length of Panoche Road we would be hard pressed to prove that that was ours. We don't have any documents that state, we don't have any title, if you will, of the entire length of Panoche Road. It was established through historical processes, way back when we were all much younger. I'm not exactly sure what I'm trying to say here, but if we open that can of worms, countywide, it's a huge can of worms to open to try to establish that one segment of road, because most of the roads that we have been adopted through that adoption of our road network map. That's what we've carried as our basis to establish our road network. Like I say, many of our roads, the entire length of Panoche Road, for an example, we don't have any specific title to. It's just been adopted through that easement process.
Okay. All right.
Mr. Chair, if we could just look into it, because other counties have done it. They have designated roads as historical trails, and they pretty much become theirs by doing that. And, I mean, I think it's worthwhile, because it could avoid us having to go into litigation in the future if we can start it at this level. So Michael can look into it. I really would like to see us not stop that thought and just continue the idea of doing that.
Mr. Chair, I just want to make sure that if we're going to go that direction, we also include maybe a couple seconds from our county council to make sure we're not adding any more risk or exposure in terms of,
Yeah, well, certainly it would have to go through council at the end. It would, but I think it's an opportunity, and I just don't want to miss that opportunity.
The standard level for the county responsibility might increase, and it's something that we have been discussed about, and that might cost more dollars and more. If we face a judge in the future, are we committing ourselves dollars?
Well, that's why I thought maybe Michael and Ashley could look into it. It's a simple process, and they can do a little bit of research to see how the Rubicon Trail was established as Rubicon Trail. Then, hey, it may do something that'll benefit San Benito County.
I have a question, Mr. Chair. And this might be a little bit out of my planning element. Can you establish a trail on a roadway that you don't know that you have right-of-way on?
We do have
That's my question right there.
Okay, that you can't prove that, okay, that you can't prove that you have right-of-way on? I mean, I'm for it.
So speaking just very generally, okay, last time I heard we were at 60,000 feet, so maybe this is 75,000 feet. In the general plan, I think the county can designate what it wants to designate. Whether that has a legal binding effect or not, I don't think so.
Then we're good.
Okay, we're good.
It's all good.
Let's just do it.
It's all good.
Do it.
Okay.
Let's check
Must
it
be
out.
getting close to 9 o'clock. It's all
Check it
good.
out, Michael.
Okay, so we're good on natural and cultural resource element.
And so just on that last point that Matt was making, what we're going to do is we're going to have Steve's going to send us some information on the systems he has. We'll try to decipher the conversation that we had tonight and put something together on a map, and then we'll bring those maps back for you to look at so that you can see it along with the other maps that we're talking about.
And I'm specifically referring to Clear Creek.
I know what yeah.
You know.
And then we'll write something into the circulation element or the natural resources, probably circulation element, that just adds that piece to it so that the map has a reference to some text. Okay?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
All right?
We're good to go to health and safety?
We're good to go to health and safety. Yes.
Mr. Chair, I have a comment for health and safety.
Supervisor Rivas.
So for health and safety, Mike, what can we actually do to talk about health in San Benito County? And what I'm referring to is in other general plans, you have cities and counties that use the general plan to address the promotion of physical activity through mixed use, the development and infill, where they have elements in the general plan that actually address nutrition and the physical health and wellness of their population. What is it going to take for us to get there?
Well, it's a great question. We're currently writing an economic development element for the city of Salinas, and the economic development element is 100 pages longer than your economic development element, mostly because it has incorporated into it quality of life. Basically, most places that are doing what you're asking about are writing a full-on element just on quality of life.
Quality of life.
So it's health, access to healthy foods, exercise, park space,
recreation.
And there is some repetitiveness with your parks and open space and repetitive with your circulation and trail systems and those kinds of things. But it becomes a whole nother element. So we didn't sign up to do that.
Right.
And
so
it's
it costs money.
It's a challenge and it costs money. I have, because we're writing the Salinas, I have a set of policies that we wrote for Salinas. But it's a piece of work to sit down and write another set of policies that apply to this county. I mean, those policies are applying to East Salinas, where they're trying to get more activities and people working together with healthy foods and having better paying jobs and those types of things. So, I don't have an easy answer for you. It is a very important.
I think it's extremely important, especially if you talk about the lack of recreation that we have here. You talk about new development in the future. I think it's an extremely important topic.
It is.
And I know another, you're absolutely right, another some general plan that is called quality of life, but then they are called health and safety. That's why I thought maybe it was an easy fix, but it doesn't sound that way.
Yeah,
it's unfortunate, and it's just another knock on our old consultant.
Well, and the consultants that you had are very high professional consultants, but the general plan law requires a health and safety element that's more to what you have. That's this is what the guidelines call for. This is what the law calls for. The health portion that you're talking about, which is the quality of life piece, is fairly new. Over the last couple of years, it's been being pushed by the state, and a lot of communities are stepping up and saying we want to have an added element, if you will, an optional element to our general plan that has policies about health and quality of life. I would highly recommend it. It's something we could probably put together for not a huge dollar value, but I would highly recommend it as an add-on. You could do it after the fact. After this is adopted, you could add another element to it if you wanted to. You'd probably have to do an initial study of some sort to, do the environmental review. So we've got to remember that piece of it. If you wanted us to do it now, we'd have to figure out how much that would cost and give you a cost estimate.
Okay. So, thank you, Mike.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Have you seen the Parks Master Plan? San Benito County Parks Master Plan.
Yeah.
Has many of your exercise elements and certain lateral transfers between subdivisions or walkways and pedestrian access throughout any new incorporated subdivisions, as well as lateral parkways along riparian areas and such as that. So you might find a lot of those exercise elements and everything in that document. I was also on the Parks Commission for a few years. So while I was there, we did that, and it's there somewhere.
We're using it.
Maybe Byron should have it.
So Mike, that raises the question for us to look at, for our research, to go back, that look at how that master plan is discussed in here or related to in here or referenced to in here.
So we did it in conjunction to get ready for this general plan.
Yeah,
that was supposed to be done 6 years ago.
And that flag hasn't been raised for us, so thank you for raising it. So we'll take a look at that and see how it's referenced. If it's not, with the board's and planning commission's agreement, we will add it in for your next go around. And for Board Member Rivas, I'll take a look at and see if there's any kind of basic quality of life policies that I can glean that might apply, that we could put in, if they fit in here and I can do it in a few hours, I'm happy to do it without writing an element. So remind me. Make a note, because I won't remember.
Mr. Chair, when Supervisor Barnes and I went to the CSAC conference in San Jose, she went to the health implementation issues, and I went to the recreation quality of life seminars, and I made a report to the board about exactly what Supervisor Robert Rivas' great ideas are talking about, and that is a lot of local jurisdictions are moving in that direction to keep communities healthy, and it really starts with the elected individuals and the public service employees, and in conjunction with a lot of the private businesses too.
Right.
To add to that, actually, the state is releasing an update of the general plan guidelines later this year, and they are going to have guidelines more to that effect that focuses on quality of life as an optional element.
Okay. Any other comments on health and safety?
There's, Mr. Chair, if I could, there's an item here that says update noise ordinance. Would we do it again, because we've already updated our noise ordinance? I thought we did, not maybe about a year and a half ago.
We did.
Do we need to do it again? Because it's here for a very specific time, and that would be 1516, I believe. No, 1517.
Can you
But we
get?
just updated it last year, maybe a year and a half ago.
Can you give me a page?
Yes, that would be 9-18, page 124, at the very bottom. I'm just hoping that our new noise ordinance coincides with the table HS1 that is on there.
We can double check
If
the
you could double check
implementation
it.
time, and if we need to, we'll just move the timeline.
Right, or maybe take it off altogether if we've already addressed.
Yeah, it doesn't, the noise doesn't really need to be redone if they're consistent. If they're not consistent, it needs to
It's
be
consistent.
redone, so, or relooked at.
If I add, this table was developed with the noise ordinance in mind, so this table is consistent with our ordinance.
And Byron, when the supervisor's asking the question, we're not talking about doing a new noise element, because the noise element's already done, the housing element's already done. Am I correct on that, on both?
Yes, I believe so. But it's, as long as the noise element was not, aspects of the noise element was incorporated into other elements of this general plan by the previous consultant, not as its own specific noise element.
I got it, okay, there you go. So we just need to make sure that the ordinance that's already adopted is consistent with the table, and we're good.
Yes.
Got it, okay, just want to make sure.
Okay, any other questions from the board or the commission? Any questions on these last few elements from members of the public? Okay, seeing none?
Any questions on the glossary? I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, I know you want to just like kill me now, but I just want to make sure that people know what these terms are. If you've had a chance to look at them, if there's anything that, you know, and you don't have to do it tonight, but if there's anything else you want defined or some kind of definition to, please let us know before we finalize this document and send it out to the public. And we're not doing that anytime soon, but just let us know.
Sorry, Michael, I didn't even see the clock.
Yeah, that's okay.
thought
No,
we
you
were done at
you gave me
9:20.
that look like I was just about ready to go home, and you now want to talk about the glossary.
So on a question, since you brought it up, wildlife corridors, are you talking about migration corridors?
Yes.
That might be a clearer word, wildlife migration corridors.
Okay. Got it. So if any of those things come up for you, you can pass them on to Byron, and he can give them to us. You know, those are not critical at this point, but it's just one of those things where, you know, maybe something's not clear. If it's not clear to you, it's probably not clear to anybody else. With that said, the conclusion for us is that we'd like the board to set another date that we can come back and show you the maps that you had requested at your last board meeting that we are working on. We would like to actually be able to talk with you a little bit about some of the policy decisions in relationship to the EIR and going forward with the EIR. And eventually, at that meeting, I'd like to get direction that we're good with everything in the general plan and we can start working on the EIR. If you remember, you had a little bit of problem last time with the EIR getting out in front of the general plan policy decision. So we're taking a different approach with you and basically saying we want you to say yes, not an approval, because you'll have a public review of the document, you'll get to make comment on it, you'll see the EIR, you'll have a comment on the EIR, you'll come back, you get to make some changes at the end if you'd like to, but we'd like an acknowledgement and direction from the Board of Supervisors that what you've heard from commissioners, what you've heard from yourself is good, everybody's in agreement, we'd like to go forward with the document, the environmental document. So we're not asking for that tonight. But what we are asking for is at your setting a board meeting to come back and say, you know, show us those maps that you were exchanging. Those are some of the things that are hanging out there. This document we've gone through. Hopefully you're comfortable with that. And then discussing, you know, policy and EIR mitigations that had come up previously. I want to make sure that we just kind of go through. The board had given us some direction about some of those things wanting to be changed and looking at things a little differently, and that may or may not be an exercise we need to go through because we're going to rewrite the EIR, but I want to have the opportunity to have it on the agenda for action to discuss having the consultants and staff move forward with the EIR, agreeing with the maps, agreeing with what we did tonight, and having a discussion about any other EIR mitigations that you might be concerned about or things that you don't want to see. So I know when we go into writing the EIR, we're not going to walk into a landmine.
Okay, so basically, Mr. Espinoza, you'll set up a meeting, we'll work with the rest of the staff, set up a meeting. Again, for the maps, you want it to be another joint meeting?
No, it doesn't have to be a joint meeting. We can send the pack. We can have, if staff's willing to do this, we can have the packet sent to the planning commissioner so they see what the maps and everything that we're doing. And I don't know that you'll have a whole lot of changes. We just want to put them in front of you and make sure you're comfortable with what you've asked us already to do. In the end of the day, I need the board's direction because the board is the final decision-making body here. I need you to say, go, write the EIR. And so that's what I'm asking for. It may end up being a 45-minute to an hour portion of your regular board meeting if you'd like to do that. I would request if you set it up for my own personal reasons, it be in the morning so I don't get caught in the afternoon when I need to be on the baseball field. Just going to tell it like it is.
Okay. All right. No.
I've got an obligation with 60 kids standing out there. I'm not going to be. I'm not going to be here. I can tell you that.
No. No. I think for as much as you've done for us, I think we can accommodate that, and
we can get it in the morning. That'd be great. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. All right.
Mr. Chair, may I thank the EMC group for the work that they have done. I really am very pleased with the changes that were there. There were changes that I thought should have been done a long time ago. They've been taken care of, and I think that you have addressed a lot of the concerns that we have expressed. So thank you. And thank you to staff. Thank you, Ashley. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. And I want to thank the board and the commission. I know we got off to a rocky start tonight, but I think it did work out better with all of us sitting here. I know it was cramped, but I do feel it worked out better with us sitting here together. And I want to thank the members of the public that are still here for working with us and getting through this process.
And I also, Mr. Chairman, would like to have a big acknowledgement to both the Planning Commission and Board for sitting through a 3-hour workshop like this. It's not always easy. And the other person that really needs an acknowledgement is Byron for guiding us through, as staff, through this complicated process. So I really want to appreciate him for his efforts.
Yes. With that, I accept a motion to adjourn. All those in favor?
Aye.
Passes 10-0. 9-0, I'm sorry.
Just a reminder to the Planning Commission, we have a meeting on April 2nd. It's not the normal midweek or mid-month. There's a meeting on April 2nd as well.